we are going to go directly to a nice opening Oli by a presenter from last year, Cindy Among-Serrao from the Humpback Whale Sanctuary will be leading us in an opening Oli, and she will tell those of you who don't know what an Oli is, what it is. Cindy?
Kunihi kamono kalaie oe ale ale la iwai lua. Ukia elai kalani ka papa oe o kawai kimi. Alai ele no nalo ka ipuha akalo lamauka o ka paae. Mai paai ka leo. He ole ka hea mai e. Aloha mai kako. My name is Cindy Among-Serrao, and I'm with the Hawaiian Islands Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary. So the Olier chant I just did is called Kunihi Kamona, commonly referred to as Kunihi or Tunihi. So in Hawaii, people Oli in order to show respect for the people, place, and culture of where someone is visiting, and is also to ask for permission to enter a place. So this chant comes from the Mo'olelo, or story of Hi'iaka, the youngest sister of the volcano goddess Pele. And basically, in the Mo'olelo, Hi'iaka must journey to find Pele's love, Lohiau, on the island of Kauai. And throughout the journey, she confronts different obstacles and challenges. Although at times the challenges seem impossible to overcome, Hi'iaka's bravery, cleverness, and fortitude, with the help of her ohana, or family, and amakua, or family gods, she was able to accomplish her journey. So I find this chant very fitting for this intern symposium because throughout your internship, you guys probably faced a bunch of challenges, or in life in general, you guys go through obstacles, challenges, and as you continue to overcome those challenges, that is when you realize just how strong you really are. Also know that the friendships and connections you made throughout this internship will continue to be a support system wherever you may go. Overall, congratulations to all you interns, and I wish you the best of luck on all your future endeavors. Mahalo.
Thanks, Cindy. That was awesome. Next, will the highest ranking PIFSC member in the audience please come forward?
Yeah, just on behalf of the Science Center, since that's me. I'm Chris. I'm one of the division fisheries research and monitoring division head. Looks like the director and deputy director are busy this morning. So thank you everyone who's participated in this program. I know the Science Center is very, very proud to have this program and pleased with the results of it. We really appreciate the help on all of the problems that we've created opportunities for the interns to help us work on. We got a huge job here, so all the help we can get is much appreciated. And the other mission that this really, I think, assists us with is we need more scientists interested in fisheries problems. Anything we can do in the world to try and foster that is really important, especially for a science center located out in the middle of nowhere with not much of a hinterland in terms of expertise. So just in short, thank you all very much for helping us, and good luck in having your future involve some aspect of fisheries work. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. That was great for about 1 minute's notice. I think we're actually ahead of time because we're going to jump straight to presentations next. And moderating our first session of 4 speakers will be Seema Balwani, who is the regional coordinator for NOAA. And she can maybe tell us which regional coordinator of what when you come up.
As Don said, I'm the NOAA regional coordinator, so I'm one of the only people at this facility that is a NOAA person, so I'm outside of the line office structure. And I work with the executive board to coordinate their high priority projects and herd cats, basically, to try to move these projects forward. So some of you may have heard about the World Conservation Congress, so I would work on something like that that goes across the line offices, has high visibility, and then a project where we want everything to go smoothly. So I try to troubleshoot problems And we have a regional coordinator in every region across the country. So I encourage you as you scatter throughout the country to get in touch with your regional coordinator if you come back to a NOAA facility. They're often the ones who are the connectors and are good resources for you as you move on your journey. So enough about me. Thank you all for being here, and thank you all for your tremendous contribution to NOAA over this past summer. I've heard such positive things from all of the mentors about the work that you've been doing and how valuable it is to our programs. As Chris mentioned, we are very shorthanded and have a tremendously large mandate, many large mandates. So all the work that you've given us and all the help that you've provided is extremely valuable in helping us achieve our goals. So thank you for being here. Let me introduce our first speaker, Jason Bayan, who is from Willamette University. He's from the PIPES program, and he will be speaking about marine debris monitoring in the northeast facing shores of Oahu. So thank you, Jason.
Good morning and welcome. My name is Jason Bayan. I'm from Waihua on the island of Oahu. My mentor is Mark Manuel. And this summer I was working with NOAA's marine debris program. So today I will be presenting on the marine debris monitoring on the northeast shoreline of Oahu. Just a quick overview of my presentation. First, I will give a bit of information on what is marine debris, what are its impacts, and lastly, I will give details on my actual project. So, marine debris is defined by the Marine Debris Program as any persistent solid material that is manufactured or processed and directly or indirectly, intentionally or unintentionally disposed of or abandoned into the marine environment or Great Lakes. Examples of which are, plastic bottles, cans left on the beach, nets, other trash. And the negative impacts of marine debris include ingestion by marine organisms, entanglement, habitat degradation, hitchhiking of invasive species, hazards to navigation, and also, of course, aesthetics. Sorry. So the first negative impact to marine organisms is ingestion. Plastic could look like food. Apparently it does to animals. Maybe it looks like a jellyfish, a plastic bag floating in the ocean. But it affects everything from fish, seabirds, like the black-footed albatross, as well as the laysan. It affects, all the sea turtles, all 7 species, I think there are. And recently, I heard that they found either a pilot whale or a right whale, but they're trying to see what's in its stomach contents. And either one, they looked at the stomach, and there's a bunch of plastic inside, which includes like a hackfish trap, which is like a tube that's about this big. Next one is entanglement. So this is mostly for derelict fishing gear. So you get nets and monofilament, fishing lines. They are trapped around, anything the neck, face. It really affects a lot of different organisms. Habitat degradation. So this mostly affects if a turtle or a seal, they come up on shore, resting behavior, nesting, also foraging. And it also affects coral reefs. If you get a big net ball, waves can make it roll over the coral, breaking off pieces, and the cycle can continue. Another one is the hitchhiking of invasive species. I'm sure there are lots of things that float through the ocean, like wood, that are natural, but marine debris, it steps it up a little bit. You get things from all over, Japan, Russia. You can get barnacles from all over. And they're all intermixing throughout the Pacific. So these are a couple of pictures that I took just at Waimanalo. I'm not sure if, what type of barnacle or whatever these are, but, just raises that issue. So, is there anything that's good about marine debris? Possibly, it can be used for nesting materials. I've seen pictures on laysan and all the Northwest Pacific Islands. Birds can use marine debris for that. Seals, it's called haul out spots. They come up and they rest on the nets that are floating on the water. But that poses, entanglement hazards to them. That's, could be good, could be bad. Also, out in the big ocean, if you have a big net just floating, pelagic fish, especially the young ones, they swim around and can be like kind of shelter for them. So where does it all come from? So marine debris, of course, is a human problem because we make the trash, and then poor waste management allows the trash to go into the marine environment. So a little bit about my project. The objective of my project was to study how much and what types of marine debris are found along the northeast coast of Oahu. To do this, I used the NOAA's marine debris program. They have a certain protocol on their website, and Mark walked me through this bunch. He's like the regional coordinator for Pacific region. Yeah, they have a really easy to use, easy to follow. So here are my different sites. So first is Kahuku, Kahana Bay, and lastly, Waimanalo. So here's a map showing my different sites along the northeast coastline. And the reason why I chose these areas was it's like a follow-up to an aerial study that was done in 2015. The Japanese government, they funded, I think DLNR to take pictures along the coastline of all the main islands and try to find where debris is found. So as you can see, I try to like overlap the two pictures. So, Kahuku, the red means it's like quite a bit of trash. Green is pretty good, and yellow is like intermediate. So, kind of lines up. I could have done a better job. And the reason why marine debris is found in those areas is, mostly due to surface currents. So I took a little snapshot of, this picture right here. It shows the speed of the surface currents as well as the direction. So it's pretty cool. This area, there are two surface currents coming together, and that's one of the reasons why Kahuku is, it gathers so much trash, which I'll show them, as well as this area. It's coming on almost perpendicular to the shoreline. Yeah. So here's how I collected data. So first, you have to choose a 100-meter portion of the beach. You split it up to 20 different sections, and out of those, you choose 4 random numbers, and that corresponds to 4 different sections on the beach. And then you actually check what's in there. You count the different types of trash, and you put in different categories. So you make your little transects, you see what's out there, and then hopefully you pick up some trash along the way. Here's what I found. It's pretty cool. I know. 97% of all the marine debris that I found was plastic, so made of plastic. And then you can go even further and look at what types of plastic, because I categorize that information. Then I found out of that 97%, 70 were made of 3 different types: hard plastic fragments, bottles and bottle caps, and lastly, pieces of small rope or net. And as you can see, Kahuku has, this is altogether how many pieces, total number of pieces that I wrote down. So like nearly 1,300 versus 300 or 150 pieces at Kahana Bay and Waimanalo. So quite a bit more at Kahuku. And here's a breakdown of, the x-axis is the number of weeks. So I started week 1, I went out and collected data, week 2, so forth. And the y-axis shows the concentration. So number of pieces of trash per square meter. As you can see, Kahuku is like way out there, 1.4 pieces of trash per square meter versus like 0.3 or 0.1. And something really cool happened here. Beach cleanup. So built up, and then I think it was 808 cleanups. They go out there every month. They do a cleanup, drop back down. So that was pretty cool to see. I'm gonna go later on today, hopefully, and they just did a cleanup Saturday, but I don't know how it went with like Darby and stuff, so that might influence what I'll find. But hopefully, you find something right around there. So what will come up with this information? This is a baseline study, so I'm trying to see how much and what types. So you can use this information for future research. I didn't say this earlier, but on the NOAA website, they created a huge database, so I'm not the only one who puts information on it. They're like people from Alaska, California, other Pacific Islands. So it's pretty cool. You can get just an overview of what's going on around the world. Also, another difference is I'm doing my data collection weekly, but other people, I think it's recommended that they do it every month. So, along with that, the Marine Debris Program here in Hawaii, they wanted to set up a long-term monitoring site. So I was just checking out areas for them. So far, it looks like Oahu would be the best area because it has the most trash. And another thing is, it could provide information for managers or people who clean up beaches, what beach would be best to go and clean up. So, Kahuku is a great one. Also, we can see by knowing the types of debris we find, whether it's land-based, whether it's coming locally, or from other places, or from sea activities. Another thing that I was looking for is called oyster spacers. They're found throughout our beaches. I found it at each of the 3 spots. It's pretty prevalent. They don't come from here. They come from Japan or the Pacific Northwest. So that's something, if you want to make policy, you can target, we're finding your trash on our beaches, so please, change it or stop it or something. That's another thing we can do with this information. Yeah. And what can we all do? So we can, do the 4 R's. Well, the 4th one is act. So we can reduce, reuse, recycle, and just learn this last one. We can refuse to use single-use plastic, trash, that sort of stuff. Thanks. Questions?
What's an oyster spacer look like? I'd like to know when I see one.
Kind of looks like a little bit like a straw. Pretty much a straw. It's a little bit thicker.
Okay.
Are there any other questions?
Jason,
Hello?
so you did your analysis on counting the pieces, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you do an analysis also by weight? And if so, did you get the same sort of patterns developing?
I did not do weight. I don't have. I didn't use a scale or anything. Yeah. So no.
Every week when you went to monitor the beach, did you use the same segment or you just run out like a new 100 meters?
Yeah, it was the same 100-meter segment throughout the whole story.
But different random selection of which plot?
Yeah, so that can change. Sometimes it was the same one, just by chance.
By chance.
Mike?
How did you differentiate between local and foreign trash?
Well, I didn't actually do that. So, it could be like a lightly used old Cheeto wrapper or something. That would be pretty local. But I didn't really look at that too much. Possibility.
Guys, wait for us to pass the mic because otherwise people on the WebEx won't hear the questions.
I know you categorize plastic by type, but was there an item you found most commonly?
The most common item by far was just a plastic fragment. It's not very specific, but that could be from anything. Just little pieces of opaque plastic.
Yeah, I noticed your size limitation was 2.5 centimeters, about an inch. Is that from the NOAA? That's from the sort of the toolkit guideline?
Yeah, so it's like bottle cap size or bigger. And then you do something extra for things that are, a foot or greater in any dimension.
Any feel for how many little Manini pieces less than that are out there?
Well, just the feeling wise, there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot that I didn't count. It was kind of nice because I didn't have to count it, but.
Yeah. So, sorry. So what would be natural that might behave the same way that this trash did? Like, are there more man o' war at Kahuku?
Is there more what?
Portuguese man o' war, those floating.
Oh, I was talking about maybe like logs or something
Or
like that.
logs, yeah, was
Yeah.
there a lot of logs?
But there was a lot of Portuguese man of war at Waimanal. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm used to seeing them there, but I don't go to the beach at Cuckoo much.
There are a few, but there's a lot more at Waimanal for sure.
You mentioned that some of this stuff is coming from poor trash disposal. It might be interesting to look at the location of landfills and shoreline disposal areas in relation to these sites, huh?
Right, yeah, that would be cool. But one thing about that, I know we have like one EVA area, but you know, I'm pretty sure most of these pieces of trash aren't coming from, you know, local. You know, if anything, our local trash is going somewhere else. You know, if it comes out to sea, just the way the currents work.
Yeah, Mark Manuel, Pacific Island Regional Marine Debris Coordinator for the NOAA Marine Debris Program. It was a pleasure working with Jason and the PIPES program. So thanks, Jason, for all your hard work. Great student, and I couldn't have asked for more. It was a project that Grace Chon, the Assistant Regional Coordinator, and I really wanted to kind of address and try to establish a long-term monitoring site. And I can answer any of the real specific questions about the shoreline monitoring protocols at another time, but I just really wanted to thank Jason for all of his hard work. And I think we got an idea. The problem with establishing shoreline monitoring the protocols here in Oahu is that there's so many great nonprofit, state, federal agencies doing good removal work, and that's one of the limitations is from a research standpoint, you would kind of want a non-visited, non-cleaned beach to monitor. So it's a struggle that we are trying to deal with, firmly establish a shoreline monitoring site. But yeah, thanks Jason for all your hard work. And he was also very critical. We just had our 2016 Hawaii Marine Debris Action Plan workshop, which brings together federal, state, county, and nonprofit private sector to discuss the topic of marine debris and how to move forward in the state. And Jason was a vital component to making that happen. So thank you.
Our next speaker is Kevin Reagan from the University of Miami. He is speaking about Papahanao Mokuakea Marine National Monument and bringing the place to the people. And Kevin is a Holling scholar, so please welcome Kevin to the stage.
So yeah, my name is Kevin Reagan. I'm a rising senior at the University of Miami. I'm studying marine biology. And this summer I had the pleasure of working under Ms. Toni Paris at the Papahanao Mokuakea Marine National Monument Office. My project goes along with the NOAA goal of healthy oceans. It's biodiversity maintained through sustainable fisheries and ecosystems. So here we go. The objectives behind my project, like I said, I work with Papahanao Mokuakea. The main objective was to provide information. So a big problem that I feel with science these days is that it's kind of hard to communicate it to the general public. It gets very jargony, and a lot of times it's kind of hard to take that jargon out because not everyone knows a better way to explain it. So the goal of my project was to provide information to a global and really broad audience, so both scientific and non-scientific, and kind of bring the place to the people, as we like to say. So Papahanao Mokuakea is isolated, it's difficult to access, and a lot of people normally would not get to go there themselves. So it's important to bring that place to them and expose them to something that they wouldn't normally be exposed to. So my project was a little different than a lot of the other scholars. I didn't do a research project. I had a media-focused project, so I actually created videos and animations to kind of communicate science to the general public. Is this the clicker? Yes. Okay. So a little bit of background on Papahanao Mokuakea. It's the most isolated part of the most isolated island chain in the world. So a lot of people actually don't know this, but the state of Hawaii is actually 3/4 the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, which is a pretty significant portion of the state. So it's the largest contiguous, fully protected area under the U.S. flag, and it's also a World Heritage Site, which is pretty unique. It's also unique in the sense that there's 7 different agencies that co-manage this monument. And we've all had a nice introduction to working with government, so we know how potentially difficult that could be. So there's 4 federal, 2 state, and 1 kind of local Native Hawaiian 2 agencies from NOAA, 2 agencies from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, 2 from the state of Hawaii, and the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And the permitting process for Papahanaumokuakea is actually unique as well, because there's actually a specific permit for Native Hawaiian practices. So the monument kind of serves as a model for the integration of culture and science, because not only are these islands important for the science aspect and the conservation and what we can find up there and what we can study in a sort of pristine, untouched by people mostly environment, it's also natively important. There's a lot of cultural practices that go on some of these islands, and not, as far as I know, no other marine monument actually gives a permit for, native cultural practices. And it's also important to bring the place to the people now, because, as I'm sure most of you know, the monument is up for potential expansion. And it's sort of in a national, international spotlight for this. There's a lot of discussion going on. And so it's been really important to sort of highlight the accomplishments that have been made in the monument over the last 10 years. It was created in 2006 by George Bush. So yeah. So basically what I did is when I got here, I got a nice thorough introduction to Papahanaumokuakea. I'm going to refer to it as PMNM, so a little less of a mouthful. And that involved kind of watching some cultural videos, doing a little background research, kind of getting a good feel for what it is and why it's important, not just for the science, but also for the cultural aspects of it. So after I got my introduction, I reviewed a lot of footage and imagery that had been taken in the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands on different research expeditions, various things. And after that, I compiled and edited 2 short videos and 1 animation after I developed scripts. And one of those had to do with marine debris. The other video had to do with animals that have been saved in the monument. And the animation was, it's a spinning globe, basically, and it kind of provides context for the size of Papahanaumokuakea compared to other things. So it's 1,200 miles from tip to tip, and that's actually the distance from Los Angeles to Dallas, if that gives a little context for the size of it. And I use completely Adobe Creative Suite software, so Premiere Pro, Photoshop, After Effects, and upon making the videos, quite a few successive rounds of editing and critiquing were involved. It was reviewed by content managers, content experts, I'm sorry. It was reviewed by the Monument Communications team. I actually had the pleasure of sitting in on one of those meetings and getting the critiques to my face, so I could actually, really understand it and get them. And that was also unique because all 7 agencies are represented in this team. It's really important that all the input from every co-managing partner is heard and incorporated. So, my results, not just a picture. In the interest of time, I'm only going to show 1 of my videos.
Thank you very, very much, Kevin. Any questions? Chris?
Statistics on things that are in the video, those come from the monument office?
Yes, so it's the 10-year anniversary of the monument this year, so there's actually a 10-year anniversary website This kind of draws on some of the topics that are highlighted on that website. So there's actually a tab for animals saved that a lot of this information is drawn from.
Where can we find and watch your videos again?
Yeah, that's a great question, and yeah, they will be up on the website once everything is finally approved. It's a process, a lot of tape. So yeah, the website, and hopefully they'll be used in education outreach events in the future.
Are you gonna give those to like Olelo and PBS so they can put it on there too?
That's a great question, and I hope it makes it that far. That would make me feel nice that I did my job well. So.
We have Tony Paris here, who is a mentor for Kevin. And would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. Kevin, great job. I just want to say Kevin's Holling Scholarship Project is pretty unique for a Holling Scholarship Project in that it didn't focus on a scientific research project. It was a science communications project, which he talked about in his introduction. But it's just really important because as critical as our work and research is to understand and protect the Earth's resources, to protect people, and to protect wildlife, equally as important is making that research and the results and the findings accessible to a broader audience, to the masses, if you will, who most of the people in the world aren't scientists. So we need to make simple, understandable products that can reach people so that they can understand what's going on and see what they can do to help. So I think Kevin, I really appreciate that Kevin, as a marine biology major, is pursuing a career in science communications because we really need that. And I think he's well on his way. He did a really great job. So thank you very much, Kevin.
So our next speaker is Morgan Larimer from the College of Charleston. And Morgan is a Holling Scholar, and her project is Mackay Watch, Evaluation of a Community Marine Enforcement Partnership.
So again, my name is Morgan Larimer. I'm from the College of Charleston, majoring in biology and international studies. And I had the pleasure of working with the Palo Marine this summer as a Holling Scholar in the NOAA Coral Reef Conservation Program. And within that, I specifically looked at the Mackay Watch program and did a program evaluation of sorts. So I'll be talking a bit about that. So Hawaii has the 4th largest coastline in the nation. There are 23,000 acres of inland surface water, 3 million acres of state ocean water, and 410,000 acres of coral reef around the main Hawaiian Islands. So that's a lot of area to enforce rules and regulations of use of marine resources. That responsibility primarily falls to the Division of Conservation and Resources Enforcement under the Department of Land and Natural Resources. So at present time, I'm going to refer to that as DOCARE. At present time, there are 103 officers throughout the state that attempt to contact, inform, educate the public about these rules and regulations, as well as enforce them. And that would be 1.2 million residents and 6 million visitors that utilize the state resources on a regular basis that they're trying to reach. So with those numbers alone, that's a near impossible task. Given the unique challenges that the geographic isolated islands of Hawaii presents, compounded by limited funding, the Department of Land and Natural Resources only receives 0.6% of federal funds, which is then divided between the divisions like DOCARE. It's impossible, really. So the Mackay Watch program is a partnership effort by and between the State of Hawaii, Department of Land and Natural Resources, non-governmental organizations, and local communities with the goal of enhancing that management of coastal and nearshore marine resources. It's a community-based resource stewardship program that acts to get the community involved and serve as the eyes on the reef. So trained volunteers are trained to report to DOCARE about suspected resource violations and act to bridge that gap between what the officers can do themselves and what really needs to be done. So here you can see a map of where all the Mackay Watch programs are throughout the state. So the program objectives are both to raise to raise awareness and have outreach events, as well as train volunteers how to properly observe and report incidents of potential violations. Training is offered annually to these communities, but are open to all citizens statewide. That provides training for volunteers and communities using the IKEKAI curriculums. So these are two curriculums that were recently developed in 2015. Now a year into their creation, I was brought in to look to see how they're achieving their objectives. So the two curriculums are for the Division of Aquatic Resources, or DAR, which educates citizens on things like catch size, bag limit, and minimal size requirements. While the Division of Boating and Ocean Recreation IKEKAI curriculum serves to educate on boating rules and regulations. So here I attended a training while here to kind of see how those curriculums are implemented and how effective that training was. Here are some pictures from it. It was great. As a person who came with limited knowledge of these rules and regulations, I learned a lot. But for being able to say if the curriculum works, I can say it works, but I didn't have any data to back that up. They were issuing pre and post tests. You can see the scores here of that test, which a lot of it was, it did work, I learned a lot, but the way the test was administered, it wasn't giving the data needed to back that up. So while there was improvement, it was not statistically significant. Another way they were measuring the success of the program implementation was on increased number of incident reports. So volunteers would then use this training, go out to the community, and if they saw suspected violations, they would report that to DoCare. And what they found is they were getting a lot less reports, actually. Part of that was because volunteers were well trained, felt comfortable approaching people who were suspected of violations, and really just talking with them and sharing that information. A lot of the times it turns out it was tourists who just had no idea, and once approached and in a manner like that, were happy to comply. So, in order to address these issues, I helped develop new tools to evaluate program effectiveness and progress. Part of that was redesigning the pre and post comprehension tests used at those training workshops, as well as a training assessment survey to gather people's perceptions on the training itself. If it was worth their time, was it effective? Yes, they may be learning something, but were they comfortable in it, and was that the best way to learn that information? As well as a post-post follow-up survey that's sent out 2 weeks post training to evaluate if they're implementing that knowledge they learned. So these surveys were sent out to volunteers all across the state via Qualtrics online. We're still in process of gathering data for the post-post anyway. But we have the redeveloped pre and post survey completed, as well as the training evaluation survey that will be implemented on August 6th for the first time. To give you a feel of what those are like and what questions are on those, we're going to take some of those questions right now. So here's one on that test. You may take or possess empty poo-poo shells at any time. Let's see a raise of hands. True? False. All right, heavy majority for false. So that's true. Just letting you guys know right now, we're starting out easy. Here's another question. Stretch mesh size of this gear, which is a throw net, must be greater than A, or I'll say A, 0.7 inches. Let's see a raise of hands. Oh, they're all A. Well, that's not it. B, 1 inch. C, 2 inches. All right, some hands for that. Or D, 2.75 inches. All right, so C was the favorite answer there, and you're correct. And the last one, what's the name of this fish? So maybe if you know that, feel free to yell it out or keep it in your head, doesn't matter. I'm going to give you the answer either way. So all of these are acceptable answers. A convictane or menini are the most common names. So depending on how well you did on that, I'm expecting there are some highly qualified people in here. That just is kind of a feel of what that test is. And we found that Tourists obviously aren't very familiar with these questions or their answers, but also natives have a hard time answering some of these. So while we're still collecting answers on that pre and post survey, part of which you just took, we do have some results on the post-post 2-week survey, which was a follow-up to the training workshop I attended. And this is just kind of a perception of how that training's been implemented and was it worthwhile. And as you can see, just from those results alone, I'm going to go through a few of them, just so a much greater increase of the impact this program and training is having. So this is, did the training workshop increase your knowledge of marine resource rules and regulations? There was a clear indication that yes, it did, much more so than the old pre and post test. Have you applied the skills you learned in the training workshop? Again, heavy yes. And then another one here is if you've referred to the materials distributed during that workshop. And yes, so they are passed out packets of the rules and regulations, and within the workshop they emphasize that it's not necessary to memorize every rule. That's hard to do. But if you have that, you can refer back to it and even use that, that pamphlet or whatever other tools are distributed to help educate the public about compliance with this. So again, yes, they're using the knowledge they learn. So the next steps I've kind of touched on will be employing that new pre and post comprehension test as well as the training assessment on August 6th, then analyzing that data for a full evaluation report. And then another aspect of this that has been great is Ikikai curriculums played a role in the recent passing of a law that allows for alternative sentencing and supplemental environmental training within Hawaii's environmental judicial court. So this allows violators, rather than going to court on the same case where judges will see 100 rape cases a day and then someone who comes in with a resource violation, they would really just dismiss it. It doesn't have the same weight in that standing, although it is equally important in different ways. So the environment court allows all of these violations to come in and treats them on an equal basis with judges who are well-trained in the subject matter. And rather than just assigning a fine, which in the past is what they were able to do, a fine that's maybe $100 when you can catch a large amount of fish and sell them for a much higher profit, it was nothing. And now they have the option of sentencing training, such as the Makai Watch training, where the violators will attend and learn more about the resource and its importance, as well as a community service aspect, which really allows the violators to connect with the resource in a way the fine wasn't allowing. So hopefully that will be implemented soon, both with the Makai Watch, which had a part in the passing of this law, and with other organizations throughout the state. I'd like to thank Makai Watch program partners and sponsors, particularly Apollo Marine, Luna Kikoa, and Ann Rosinski, as well as you guys for your time. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Mahalo. I have a question back there?
Maybe, no, all right. Talking more. So the comprehensive tests define if an outreach program is able to get funding kind of to a certain extent.
Yes.
So I have two questions. One, have you considered that all of your answers are actually A for all the pre and post tests?
Worth looking into, but so far I think that's good. I think that was just PowerPoint.
Okay.
Yeah, just to trip you guys up, really.
And then an actual one. So in FEMA, we don't use the same pre and post tests, but some agencies do. Are you guys getting identical pre-test and post-test?
We are. So that's part of the new pre and post test, is that they're identical, because the past one that didn't work the same was different. And we found that some questions people were more familiar with than others, and that was part of the issue, is that they would distribute these tests, people would take them, and even for the pre-test, they'd go over the responses and people would change them. And then with the post-test, which was a little different, they could still go in and change the answers. So we were having like 100 and 100 for the pre and post. Different questions that they may or may not have known, and this just ensures we're really comparing apples to apples.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yes.
Hi. Thanks, Morgan. That was a really great presentation. I just had a question about the decrease in the reports to DoCare that you were observing after the training.
Yes.
And whether you felt like, so one thing you brought up was that it might be that they're intervening with the fishers in their area. but did you also have a feel for any kind of like increase in quality over quantity? So are the reports coming in better informed as opposed to just reporting anytime they saw anything that may or may not look, suspicious?
Absolutely. So this program's been around since 2005, but was only recently formalized by the state in the past few years. And when they first implemented this training, people would go out with their new knowledge and were so excited to use that, would really report anything and everything. And most of them were not violations. So part of this with the new training in the Ikekai curriculum is that people are taught how to report, what to report, as well as the rules and regulations. So less reporting was reflective of that, and that they'd see something, either approach them or realize that that wasn't a violation, which is something that wasn't considered when that was initially selected as a measurement of program success.
Thank you, Sima. So in our office, we play a silly lunchtime game called Bananagrams, which is like Scrabbles. And I told my interns that they had to win at least twice for them to get a recommendation letter. Morgan won 3 times, which is indicative of her over-delivering through the entire fellowship. I was very impressed by her initiative that she took and showed throughout the entire time. Doing evaluation is hard. We often don't get it right at NOAA. And she took the initiative, went to the beach. She wanted to get a sense of the baseline knowledge. So she started interviewing random people at the beach. Would you take a survey? It's hard to do that. And she got data, getting a sense of basically what's the baseline level of information that the community has compared to the Mackay Watch community. She went to meetings with lawyers from the enforcement division, law care, and she would say, this is how we're gonna do it, and lay out a plan. And she developed the tools to do a pre and post, and the post-post, which hasn't been done since the program was implemented. So tremendously useful information that is coming here. Very impressed by all the work you've done. Thank you. You earned the recommendation letter, Morgan.
Our next presenter is Megan Joyce from Cornell University, who is a Science Center Young Scientist Program intern, and she is going to present on a case study, the effective communication of science for West Hawaii IEA.
Hi everyone, I'm Megan Joyce. I'm one of the PISO interns, as was mentioned, for the summer, and I've been working with Jamie Gove and Amanda Dillon. So this is really a story about my journey through science communications. As scientists, a lot of people make a pit stop and outreach on their way to becoming a researcher, but my goal has always been to do communications. So when I was little, I was inspired by camp counselors and the Wildlife Conservation Society people at the Bronx Zoo who stood at the corner of exhibits and answered every single one of my curious kid questions. Now, fast forward just a couple of years and I was entering college with an ambitious and very elaborate plan of studying all of the biology, ecology, ethics, management, and policy to be able to effectively communicate with anybody about any conservation issue, which meant that I also needed to study communication. So, the last couple years I've been working with wolves. And working with wolves, as you may know, they're highly controversial, but they're also adorable. And working with these animals involved everything from working on a capital campaign for the Wolf Conservation Center in New York where I was working, running moonlight howls with wine and cheese parties for adults and overnight sleepovers outside the enclosures with kids. And it also involved all of the animal husbandry, which involved feeding them chicken feet and frozen ferrets and picking up roadkill deer off of the side of the road. So now I'm in Hawaii working with coral. You may be thinking that coral reefs and wolves have nothing in common, but I'd like to tell you that you're a little bit mistaken. Community support and support in general is really important for any conservation issue, whether that's large predators or ecosystems or reef fish. So you can't get anywhere without traction and someone that believes in what you're doing, whether that's a vital community member or a financial supporter. Now, science, there needs to be a bridge between the science and the people that can use the science. So this is where I come in. These are just a sample of all of the things that I've been working on this summer. I started out the first weekend I was here going to Ocean Fest, and I did outreach involving cetaceans and protected species safety, and I also did a bunch of marine debris giveaways and crafts for kids. I've done a lot of printed materials, some of which you're holding in your hands, and some are outside, which may have enticed you to come to this symposium in the first place. I've done many other printed materials for various NOAA projects, and I've done social media, tweets, blog posts, and general communications strategy work in general. And a large part of my presentation project over the summer has been on the West Hawaii Integrated Ecosystem Assessment, which I will get to in a little bit. But first, as scientists, we discover new species, new diseases, causes, effects, values, weather patterns, and what's the point of doing all of this if we're not sharing it? You study something, you publish a paper, and maybe some people read it. So this day and age, news media isn't going to look through a pile of journal articles to figure out what's new, what's noteworthy, and what's groundbreaking. They're going to need a tip-off that the story they're looking for is yours, and that tip-off starts with you. So, have a slide up. Why should you care? Let me show you something. This is a paper that was published that came out just a month ago. Bright spots among the world's coral reefs. Chances are you've already seen it, but how is it possible? It's only been out for a month. Well, the authors of this paper put a huge amount of effort into their communications, and the outcome of that is that you and over 5,000 other people have already seen this paper, and that only counts the people that visited the page on Nature. Now, over 105 news articles have picked up this story, and people in over 8 countries have joined the conversation on Twitter. And that includes people from Canada and Sweden. Now, Nature is clearly put in a lot of time and effort and money into tracking these statistics. They care about where their papers are going, about who's reading their papers, and about how many people are reading their papers. Do you know how many people have read your last paper? This is an about-to-be-released report, West Hawaii Integrated Ecosystem Assessment. The authors want it to be just as successful as the Bright Spots paper. So what's going to separate this report from all of the rest? Well, the communications that let people know that it's out there, it's new, it's noteworthy, and it's relevant to them. To do any kind of communications, you need to know your audience. And you have to know if you're talking to the community that you're working in or policymakers way out in Washington, D.C. You could even be talking to somebody that you already know disagrees with you, and that makes things a little bit harder. So why should we care about the West Hawaii Integrated Ecosystem Assessment? Well, West Hawaii is home to the largest and most intact growing coral reef in the Hawaiian Islands. Coral reefs are the canaries in the coal mines for the oceans and ultimately the world. And any healthy and balanced ecosystem, be it marine or terrestrial, is important for both the environment and the communities that rely on it. They rely on it for recreation, for sustenance, for food, for agriculture, for their economies. This is really important. So, in short, everyone should care about this West Hawaii Integrated Ecosystem Assessment. So we went big with communication on all fronts. We have social media, blogs, webpage, printed materials. They'll all come out when the paper comes out, so keep your eyes open, tell your friends, it's gonna be great. This is the Kona IEA website. Eye-catching, right? Would you stay and read everything? Probably not. We're gonna change that. What if I told you that this was the new landing page for the West Hawaii IEA? And if I told you that this here is an interactive graphic? You'd probably be more likely to stay and learn at least a little bit about West Hawaii. This is the graphic. So developing a webpage graphic is pretty difficult. It needs to be eye-catching and engaging and informative all at the same time. So the indicators are clickable, and a small box pops up with a description of the indicator and how it fits into the ecosystem. And the larger titles are clickable and will link to a corresponding section of the report. And this is going to be the front page of the website. So hopefully people will be able to get the information out of this that they want to get. Developing a tweet or an Instagram post is a lot different than developing a web page. For starters, people find the webpage primarily through search engines, so they're looking for information about West Hawaii, about ecosystems. People might follow the Twitter or Instagram accounts just to see a cool photo. So how do we bridge that and get the actual information to the people? Well, condensing 150 pages of scientific information down into 140 characters is not easy, clearly. And it can't just be a collection of buzzwords. It has to be something that's going to be engaging, get people to read it and click on the link, go somewhere else. Likes are based on how much time people are going to spend on your post and how much time they're willing to spend on it afterwards, talking about it, sharing it with their friends. So our hope is that people spend enough time to go to the website and play with the infographic for hours. And that's what science communication is about. Get a couple more people interested in what you do. Get a few more, get your stuff out there just a little bit more. Maybe inspire a classroom of kids to be interested in the environment. We got comments back from science camp that was last week, and one of the comments from the kids, when asked, what would you tell your friends and family about this, said, everyone at NOAA makes a difference. That's what we want from our science communications. We don't necessarily want a world full of scientists, no offense, but we want scientists who study climate and food and tell people about what they find. We want engineers who want to develop sustainable waste management systems. And we want architects who want to build sustainable buildings. We want economists who want to value environmentally conscious companies, and we want agriculturalists who want to produce ecologically beneficial crops. We want fishermen who care about the whole ocean and not just their target species. We want a world that keeps the earth in mind. No matter what people tell you, words and ideas can change the world. But your words and ideas are only going to make a difference if you get them out there. And that starts with each and every one of you and the center itself. Think of how many people would watch a Snapchat story of a turtle or a seal being freed from marine debris. Think of how many people would use an Instagram contest, an Instagram caption contest, to be featured on the NOAA Instagram. Or how many people would answer a question on Twitter if it's a weekly quiz, gives them more information and gets people involved. Think about how your science can have more of an impact. And let me leave you with the words that inspired me to take on this crazy journey. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not. Thank you.
Did you animate that graphic yourself?
I did.
Nice.
Most of the pictures, they were either NOAA pictures or photos that I've taken, and all the graphics were drawn by me.
Including that turtle?
Including the turtle.
That was a really great presentation.
Thank you.
Great job. So I know you're interning here for the summer and working on this.
Mm-hmm.
Who's going to work on it after you leave?
All of you. You're all going to do all of the communications for all of your scientific papers.
Well, I mean more of the West IEA stuff.
Oh, well, the report's going to be rolled out, and all of the media and communications I've done most of them. I'll be here for another week, so I'm going to finish everything up. But then they'll be put out. They just need to be, you just have to press tweet, you just have to press post. So all that stuff's been done already.
So that was a really great presentation, and you've inspired us to go out and communicate more. So after your time here, what would you advise us, being in the federal government, how we might do better at staying on top of social media and the changes?
Social media, I think a lot of it is, like I mentioned with Twitter, it is a conversation. So you have to involve people. It's not just you putting your stuff out there. You also get a ton of feedback. So comments on pictures, questions. You can do a Twitter, #Twitter takeover. You can have a scientist take over Twitter. People can ask questions. I saw something similar to that for Sea Turtle Week. I don't know. I think it was on a blog though. But just any kind of conversation gets people more involved, gets people to share it, something like that. And definitely keeping up with new social media platforms. I mean, Snapchat right now is pretty in. So Snapchat stories, you could get tourists that come to Hawaii, because obviously there's tons. They would watch all kinds of stories about cute turtles and cute seals, and I know that we don't just do cute things here, but you know, if you want to reach the tourists, you can have information about Mackay Watch and about the about the rules and regulations about handling or not handling anything, and you know, how to actually use our resources.
One of the things that sometimes makes science boring is the way scientists try to be very careful about not overstating anything and to be very objective. How do you deal with the issues of objectivity versus advocacy when you're trying to make a story out of something?
Mm-hmm. So it is definitely a little bit difficult. I mean, you saw with the tweets, those are just two other options that I came up with. We sat in the office for like an hour yesterday trying to come up with tweets. So, you know, it's not easy. And it's not easy to balance objectivity, and it's not easy to balance excitement with, you know, like straight facts. And sometimes it is finding the exact word. There's another quote, which I did not include, but Mark Twain said the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and a lightning bug. So it is hard, and it takes practice, honestly. You do get better the more you practice.
I don't think we can overstate the importance of science communications, as clearly Megan just articulated and Tony mentioned earlier. And I don't think we can, or I certainly can't understate how horrific I am at that, as well as many scientists. I think we have a hard time, you know, distilling our complex ideas and information down to something digestible and readily sort of taken up by the public. And I think Megan did a great job throughout this entire month and a half at really trying to help us out on how to do that. I certainly learned a lot from her, and trying to distill all of that down to 140 characters or less is also horrifically difficult, despite it seemingly should be easy. So we were really, really fortunate to have Megan.
Hi, I'm Amanda Dillon, and I was a co-mentor with Jamie. I just wanted to thank Megan for all her hard work. She's really done a great job, and I wanted to point out that she went from not knowing any of the design programs to these beautiful drawings and illustrations within these past few weeks. But she's really been an inspiration. She has a lot of great, exciting ideas, and we threw her in the deep end, and she swam. It's been a great pleasure working with you, Megan. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to encourage you to read the back of your programs, because there's a lot of people that helped pull this off. It's not nearly just myself. I had to delegate so much stuff because, as some of you may know, I've taken on a detail since early June, and I have not had much time to put towards this project, but I had an awesome team of people who stepped forward to help make this a successful undertaking. So I'm not going to read them all off now, but please read the back of your program. And speaking of the program, I want to thank Megan, because that's version 8 of the program, I think, and we had version 12 of our program flyer, and I think version 5 or 6 of the poster. So in addition to that great presentation you just heard, she's been awesome at making our materials for this symposium. And lastly, before we go to break, I would like to ask Jeff Hare to give us a few words of wisdom to our interns. He is with JIMAR and one of the co-sponsors of our PYSO program.
Thanks, Don. So just real quick, I'm Jeff Hare. I'm the Deputy Director for JIMAR, which is the Joint Institute for Marine and Atmospheric Research. 4 of the speakers today are what's called PYSO interns, so that's the PIFS, which is the Pacific Islands Fisheries Science Center, the federal NOAA laboratory, which JIMAR partners with. It's a PYSO is the PIFS Young Scientist Opportunity, which is sponsored via JIMAR with funding from the Science Center, so we deeply appreciate that. And the 4 PYSO interns are effectively JIMAR employees for the short term over the summer. It's a really great program. It's very competitive. There's something between 75 to 100 applicants for the 4 positions. So you folks who were awarded the internship should be proud of yourselves. It's remarkable every time I see the talks, the work that you're able to do, and that goes for the Hauling Scholars as well and the other interns that are here. You know, it's a great program, not just because stuff like this, but you know, it gives the JIMAR staff and also the federal staff, the federal scientists, opportunities to be mentors and to be of assistance and to be valuable to young people and help foster their career, which is very rewarding. And the other thing that it does, and you can see it in some of the comments, it invigorates the science that we do in the center. It inspires the older scientists, even old guys like Chris Boggs and Jeff Polavina. I mean, these guys are program managers that have been working for 35, 40 years, and they're here not because they need to be here or they're told to be here. They're here because they're inspired by the talk. So I just want to send along that appreciation.
Thanks, Jeff.
So words of wisdom. I think Jeff said it really well, and I think it's inspiring for us as well as hopefully for you guys to come in. Seeing the quality of presentations, you're just blown away because it's a short amount of time. And honestly, it doesn't feel like that long ago that I did something like this, but it was nowhere near this scale. And so the ability for us to be able to provide this opportunity, but to let you folks come in and really shine during it is really important. And I hope that during your time here, you get pretty much a viewport into how a government scientist operates or the Cooperative Institute folks operate. Because there is an ability, and this is an opportunity for you to work in a pretty decent environment where we've got state-of-the-art facilities, and NOAA really has become a launching pad for a lot of great scientific ideas. And I look forward to seeing how all of you progress in your careers, whether it's here or otherwise. And I appreciate you giving us back as much as hopefully you've gotten from us. So again, I allowed your time. I appreciate that the work you put into this, and I wish you all the best in your careers in the future.
Okay, thank you, Don. So we're going to get started right away. First up, we have Jennifer Wan-Ala, who is a Halling Scholar, and she's going to be presenting on Where is All the Plastic Going? A spatial analysis of debris from lancetfish stomach contents in comparison to a dispersal model.
Yeah, my name is Jen, and this summer I worked with Don Kobayashi looking at where all of the plastic we find in lancetfish stomach are, and we compared it to a dispersal model. So here's a brief outline of what I'll be talking about today. So first, I'll go into my objectives for this project. Then I'll be talking about background, about marine debris and the long-nosed lancetfish, or Elaposaurus ferox. Then I'll be talking about the methods we used, our results, a summary of our findings, and our next steps, and also acknowledgements for all the people who really contributed to this project. And this is one of my mentors, Elon, and we're dissecting lancetfish stomachs, which is amazing if you have not done it before. It's like opening a present that you don't know what's going to be inside. So objectives for this project were to first spatially examine the spatial distribution of the debris that we find in the fish stomachs. And then we wanted to compare our observed data, so the stomach data, to model data, to see if there's overlap between predicted and observed. So background, so marine debris is everywhere, and we all see it all over the beaches. You know, it can go from really large pieces of plastic or any type of like trash you see on your beaches, or it can be really small microplastics. And these debris are found all across this large ocean basins, and are really converging in this region here called the subtropical convergence zone because of different oceanography processes such as currents, winds, gyres. So we can really say that the distribution of marine debris accumulation is really driven by oceanography in the regions. But it's really hard to survey where all of this debris is found, because if you look at this picture of the Pacific Ocean, it's huge, and ship time is really expensive. So it's like a cheaper way to really understand where everything is. Could be potentially to use biological samplers, such as the long-nosed lancetfish, to look at its stomach contents, to really understand, where this debris might be. But why should we even use this fish? Like, would it be beneficial for us? So the long-nosed lancetfish has been caught in this region. So this is where the Hawaii longline fishery encompasses from this plot is from 1990 to 2008, and darker circles means higher effort or more fish caught in a sense. So we get our samples from this region from the Hawaii Longline Observer Program. And what's really great about the long-nosed lancet fish is that right now it's one of the most abundant caught species in the longline fishery in Hawaii. And it's also not sold for consumption because it has really watery gelatinous tissue and it doesn't taste very good. People don't like eating it. I still want to try, but it doesn't taste good, so no one eats it. It has, and also here we have a CPUE done, or a catch per unit effort done for the species, and we see that it's increasing, so we'll still have samples in the future to, I guess, look at its stomach contents. It also has a really unusual digestion, so a lot of the species we see, its prey items found inside the stomach, they're all still in really relatively good condition, and we can usually identify them 2 species, majority of them. And they also feed across a really broad range of depths on diverse species. So the project that I'm a part of during the year, they have found that they've eaten over 150 different prey species. And they're also known to ingest marine debris. So this is a really thorough diet study of a midwater predatory fish that we can use, we can take advantage of the data from. So the methods we used for our project were to first, I used R to spatially visualize the data that, the marine debris data that was collected. And then for the dispersal model, for the second part, I used the dispersal model in Python to release particles from these different points here, the red dots around this coastline, and also in the main Hawaiian Islands. And for our advection or currents, we used the HICOM model, and our initial conditions, we had our depth of about 0 to 5 meters. We had 47 total sites where we released particles from, and our simulation duration lasted for 3 years. So going into our results, so this is the spatial analysis, the first part, and here on the left, we have a sample distribution of where our stomachs came from. And the total amount of samples we have is over 1,200. So here we have the Hawaiian Islands here, where a bigger circle means we have more samples from that region. And then on the right, we have mean proportion by weight of inorganic debris, and it's the same location. And this just means that we took the mass of the debris divided by the mass of the total stomach contents, and we divided them by one another to really standardize our findings. And initially, when looking at the plot on the right, it seems that there's a high proportion of debris found in this region, right? But if we compare it to our sample distribution, we have low sampling in this area. So we shouldn't necessarily take this as an area that truly has high proportion of debris. So because of this, I talked with a bunch of people, and we decided that for now, we should threshold the data, or maybe take out regions where there's low sampling, so that we can currently see what's going on. So here we have the 2 same plots. So this is no data threshold with sample distribution on the top and the mean proportion on the bottom. And when I thresholded the data to exclude regions that had 5 or less stomachs, I found that we have a potential true region of higher proportion of debris. And between 20 and 30 north, it seems to be equaled out potentially, but we still need to run more analyses on this. And now getting into our dispersal model, so here we have, here's the coastline again, so the red stars is where we released particles from for 3 years. And this plot shows where all of the different particles ended up after the 3-year period. So purple means that there's less particles or less abundance, where red means high abundance. And here we see that there's a large focus of debris accumulating in this region. And when we looked at other other past papers, this is potentially where the North Pacific garbage patch is located. And then when we release particles from our main Hawaiian Islands, we find that they accumulate in the same region. And this is interesting because it showed that oceanographic processes play a large role in where debris ends up, no matter, potentially no matter where the location is. So we decided to look at the different years. So here we have a plot, so we split it up between 3 years, and the particle is labeled based on what year we released it from. And when you split it up between year 1, 2, and 3, we see our concentrated area begin to move northward towards California, or like the west coast of the US, which is really interesting to see, and we'd like to look more into that. And then going into our comparison, so this is the same plot I showed earlier of the mean proportion of inorganic debris. I just plotted it on a larger scale so that you could compare the two. And when I overlay the model data on top of it, you see that it kind of overlays really nicely when you look at it, so it seems that the two potentially have a lot of overlap, though we do need to do more analyses to say if this is really true. And when I compare it for where we release particles from the main Hawaiian Islands, and we look at that overlap as well, we see that it overlaps pretty nicely as well. So in summary, we found that our computer simulation modeling was a useful tool to looking more towards how marine debris accumulates in the ocean. We found that oceanographic features related to this are really strong and insensitive to the location of where debris, is released from. Simulated regions of marine debris abundance align really well with our Lancet fish stomach data. And our preliminary results indicate a possible migration of the North Pacific garbage patch over time, or over the time period that we looked at, so from 2008 to 2013. But we have a lot of next steps for our project. We would like to collect and analyze stomach samples in areas with low sampling, so the areas that are to threshold. Add more variables to our dispersal models, such as sinking rates, where we release particles from particle sizes, so they can represent different types of debris in the ocean. We'd like to do a generalized additive model, or GAM, to identify the relationship among the different variables. Spatially analyze to better characterize the location and shape of the convergence patch. And lastly, we'd like to statistically examine possible changes over time and seasonality in the model. So to look and see, seasonally, is it moving or not? I'd just like to give a big mahalo to everyone who helped me. So my mentor, Dawn, the entire ecosystem and oceanography program. You guys are awesome to work with and have been a great help. My two mentors in California, who I have been bothering over the internet, they're Anela Choi and Elon Portner. They're great too. Jeff Drazen on the Deep Sea Fish Biology Lab, they really helped out as well with a lot of discussion. Brian Dieter and Jasmine Pinello, they helped me out with a lot of GIS stuff, learned a lot about that this summer. And my friends, I didn't put them all on there, but they really helped me out with discussion. And the Noah Halling Scholarship Program for paying for me to do this work this summer, thanks a lot. The Hawaii Longline Observer Program, because without them we would have no data to analyze, so thank you guys a lot. And I just like to put it out there, #TeamLancetFish, because it's a really great work with a lot of great people, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Yeah.
What did you use for the dispersal model? Like, what were the particles? Were they buoys with GPS?
No, so it was just completely modeled. So it was a Python model where we just released particles. Yeah, it was all really modeled data.
Were you just looking at debris, sort of primary debris, or were you looking at things that the prey items had eaten? Were you looking at secondary solvent contents or just the primary?
For this project?
Yeah, I mean, the lancet fish also eat other fish.
Mhm.
Did you look at those fish's stomachs too?
No, we didn't. We just
Okay.
looked at what was directly inside of that fish's stomach. Is there a question?
So does the answer to that imply that lancet fish feed at the surface? Is this stuff all floating stuff?
So, that, I'm not entirely sure, but they are known to go at different depths, and the prey items found in their stomachs are known to be found at deeper depths than just the surface. So it is very interesting to think about. That's why we want to add sinking rates for the debris in the model to see, like, oh, if we say that over time this piece of plastic will sink potentially, and then we'll maybe go at the depth where the lancet fish is found, like, and it's the same accumulation as the garbage patch in the model, that may show us something. We really don't know right now.
Great, thanks for the questions. Don Kobayashi, Jen's mentor, wants to say a couple words.
Thanks, Jen. That was an awesome talk. And I would like to point out that she has thrived, not necessarily because of me, but in spite of me, because I have been very distracted since June, and she's had to cope with many challenges of trying to get time with me. In fact, last night she got so desperate she tracked me down at restaurant 604 Pauhana and tried to get some input from me, and I hope I gave her some good feedback, and I'm not sure how coherent I was, but it worked out really well, and I'm very lucky to have Jen for the second summer in a row. You may recall that she was up here last year participating in our intern symposium. She was a PYSO intern last year, working under Tita Jones, who was in here earlier, and myself on a somewhat related project, but different, looking at energetics of pyrosomes and other gelatinous zooplankton in the pelagic food web. So Jen has returned to us, and she definitely feels like family to our very small group in EOP. I think my time is up, according to Adrian. Thanks, Jen. It's been awesome working with you.
So we're on to our second talk of the session. It will be Liz Stebbins, and she is a PYSO intern with the FRMD Stock Assessment Program, and she will be presenting on the recreational fishery for blue marlin in the Hawaiian Islands.
Okay, I'm Liz Stebbins. I'm a PYSO intern, and my project this summer was on the recreational fishery for blue marlin in the Hawaiian Islands. And I worked mostly with Felipe Carvalho and John Broziak. They were my mentors, so thanks to them for all their help this summer. This is a blue marlin. It's over 1,000 pounds, and it's what they call a grander here. And it's basically the reason why so many people come out here, and it's kind of the basis of this recreational fishery here in Hawaii, specifically off the Kona coast of the Big Island. The recreational fishery here is pretty big. A recent survey estimated over 150,000 marine recreational anglers, 42% of whom were non-residents. So not only are locals here going out and trying to catch these fish, but it's also kind of a tourist draw. So people are coming in and spending their money here. Direct expenditures were valued at around $450 million annually, and they valued the charter fishing industry as $20 million, much of this in marlin fishing alone. Which, I mean, people are coming out here. I mean, there's tuna, there's spearfish, but marlin, and specifically the granders, are this big kind of driving force behind the recreational fishery. This is the first grander, caught in 1954 by George Parker, I think it was. And in 1954, so this has been going on for decades. It's not kind of, a recent thing. It's kind of become a part of the culture off of Kona. And my overwhelming desire to understand more about these blue marlin was why I came here. It had nothing to do with the fact that I went from Boston to here in Hawaii. Nothing at all. The general objective of my project was to synthesize the available blue marlin data, and kind of underneath that bigger umbrella, there were 4 more specific objectives. I wanted to build a database for the blue marlin recreational data, so that kind of involved organizing it, compiling it from these different sources, like making sure that it was all, kind of easily accessed, which was a lot of Excel and copying and pasting. I wanted to compare the catch information across multiple data sources. So just kind of maybe look at the sizes, look at how they fit into one another, make sure that those kind of match up. Explore trends in the size and weight and like total catch. Some other things I looked at were area and seasonality, and then kind of assess the impact of this recreational fishery as a whole for the blue marlin in the North Pacific Ocean. So number one, build a database. There were 3 different sources that I looked at. One was the Division of Aquatic Resources, which I'm going to call DAR, the Hawaiian International Billfish Tournament, HIBT, and the Charter Desk data. DAR was by far the biggest one. Every person with a commercial marine license has to report their catches through DAR. It encompasses all the islands. It's from 1948 to 2016. And kind of the biggest drawback of this data set is that when you record your landings, you record the amount of pieces you landed, so kind of the total of individuals, and the total weight. So you can't really get individual weights of each fish. You get the average weight if you wanted to calculate that. So that could kind of be a drawback if you wanted to look at the size distributions. The international billfish data goes from, I think the first one, 1959 to 2001. There's actually one happening, I think, next week. It's been going on since then, but we just have had trouble getting the data past 2001 from the directors of the tournament. It's run out of Kona, and it actually was used recently in a study by Dr. Secchi that just basically took kind of the catch data and compared it with oceanographic data off the coast of Kona to just kind of study some anomalies, specifically in 1995, looking at the eddies. So it's been done before, but just never really, no one's looked at this data kind of in looking for the impact of what this fishery is doing. And Charter Desk was the last one. It's the smallest, I think only because it's so recent. Like, they only started recording it in 2009. But, I mean, when you look at it kind of with all the other ones, it's not insignificant. So here's kind of where I start comparing the catch information. There's going to be a lot of graphs, but hopefully I can make them a little more palatable. The Charter Desk is right down there. It's pretty small, but the DAR data is by far the biggest. 180,000 individuals caught over around 60 years. And right next to it is the DAR single, which is kind of a subset of the data I made for single catches. So ones that only one piece was landed, so you know the weight of that fish. And then the billfish tournament is obviously the smallest. It's only run for 1 week out of the year, so there's not going to be a lot of individuals caught there. This is probably one of the most interesting graphs that I found when I was looking at these data time series. And you can just kind of see how the practice of tagging and releasing has kind of increased. I think it's around 1986 you see this trend where all of a sudden the amount of fish that are caught and released from put back in the water starts to exceed the amount of fish that were caught and landed and killed, kind of hung up looking for that. And if you look down by 2001, it's almost all of the fish are being put back. And a kind of recent paper talked about the post-release mortality in these fish, and they estimated it to be around 14%. So 14% of the fish that you put back in there are dying, but 86% of these fish are surviving the tagging. So it kind of even lessens the impact of this recreational fishery even more. Pretty cool. It's kind of just like conservation. People who are catching this fish just realize that if they want more fish back in the water, they're going to have more people coming to catch them. There's going to be more fighters, more big fish, etc. Here, exploring the trends in size and weight and total catch. So this is just a time series, and all the different data sets are on there. Kind of the biggest takeaway that I took away from this is the 80s and 90s. There's kind of this boom in fishing the blue marlin. It's probably due to increased fishing effort, but we don't really know that. You can just kind of see that it increases and goes back down. So maybe that's something to look at. We can see it, but I just don't know exactly what caused it. Seasonality, you can see that, it's just the months on the bottom. So the summer months, July, August, September, you're getting these huge, these just much greater numbers of fish being caught. But that could be for, a number of factors. It could be that the seas are rougher in winter, so people don't go out and catch. Don't want to go out and catch. It could be that, this is when they're spawning, so there might be, more fish around. It could be because tourists come in and want to catch in the summer. We don't really know, but there's a pretty clear trend there. And then area. Basically, 2 of the data sets only recorded the area where the fish was caught, and that's the billfish tournament and the DAR data. And if you were going to do some kind of analysis on the area, you would definitely want to use this data set just because it's on a much finer scale. The DAR data has here I can use the laser, 2 different areas for the entire west coast of Kona. So really not super helpful. And then Oahu's got, some high numbers too. Yeah, this is the weight distribution of the fish. So this can kind of be correlated with size of the fish. Most of the fish that are caught are just kind of in this range, so 250 to 300 pounds. Not many fish are over 500 pounds, let alone 1,000. But kind of at the end of this spectrum is the biggest fish that was ever caught, which was in Oahu, which is 1,800 pounds. Many times over the summer, I just Googled this and looked at it because I cannot believe a fish can get that big. But so that's basically the weight distribution. And if you wanted to look at them kind of compared by data set, these are just box plots. The median's kind of the same across the data sets, but you can see that the interquartile range is a little bigger for the charter desk, and so there are some slight differences which might be of interest. And another thing to just kind of note about the weight is that anything over 300 pounds is probably a female. So all of these fish being caught. Also, this is the one, I think one of these might be wrong, but one of these is the 1,800 pound fish, and that was really cool to see that in the data and on Google. Finally, just assessing the impact of the recreational fishery kind of in the bigger context. For that, I used the most recent stock assessment report from the ISC. It came out pretty recently, like July of this year, and it goes up through 2014, and the biggest takeaway from that is this Kobe plot. If you don't know what this means, I didn't know what it meant until pretty recently, but the colors are kind of indicative. If the stock is here in the green, it's not being overfished, and there isn't overfishing going on. If it's in the red, it's in bad shape, and the blue marlin stock actually went to kind of, the yellow area. It was being overfished for a while, but it's back in the green. So kind of the biggest takeaway from this is that the stock is doing okay. So basically, to put that in kind of context, I have the recreational data here. I calculated the exploitation rates, approximate exploitation rates for the total population out of the stock assessment report and the recreational data. And you can see basically like the percentage of the stock that's being exploited, and the recreational fishery is having like an extremely minimal impact. On some of these, it's like 0.1% of what the overall exploitation rate is. So I kind of use this graph to conclude that the recreational fishery is not having an impact on the overall population of blue marlin, which is it's a pretty big deal just because before it was an unknown. There was this recreational fishery that's obviously really big here in Hawaii. Like, people are pulling out these really big fish, and we just didn't know how it was affecting it. So that's kind of the main summary of my project as a whole. And basically for the future, the data is now organized. It's kind of described. You can kind of use it for anything, like modeling potential. You can look at that. You could look at trends in average size over time to see how that's changed. You could use it to look at, temperature anomalies, like a particularly strong El Nino and how that affected it in the data if you wanted to. And yeah, acknowledgements. I wanted to thank Joe O'Malley and Eniao and Brian Langstead for getting me that huge data set, Jarmar for funding me, and Pips for hosting me. This has been a really great summer, and yeah, this also was done by Megan, this really nice fish, so thanks to her. Yeah.
Nice presentation. I just have a comment. When you talk about recreational fisheries, the data you covered here looked for the chartered boats and also the boats with commercial marine license. There's probably a good portion of the catch from private boats who don't have CMA, commercial marine license.
Nice talk, Liz. Do you have a sense for how much overlap there is between the three data sets you...
Yeah, so I think the idea is that both the billfish tournament and the charter desk would be reported through the DAR data, and to look at that, I kind of did some really easy calculations, just like the percentage, and see the proportion of the charter desk to the overall DAR data, and then just looked at that over the years, and it seemed pretty consistent. So I was just kind of comparing them in terms of if you wanted to use the data sets separately for, they're each different, pros and cons, but yeah, they fit into it. They're supposed to be reported.
So on the opposite end of that, do you have a feel for how much wouldn't be reported in all the data sets that you've compiled?
I think that probably one of the biggest things I've learned working in fisheries is that the data is there's always going to be people who either who can misidentify it or people who don't really want to report it. So I think that, some of these things in the DAR data, I knew that I mean, I don't think there were ever 2 fish that were both caught around 1,800 pounds. I know there was only 1, but there were 2 entered. There are just going to be some issues in the data. That's kind of what I learned.
With the catch size graph that you were you showing a disparity with the large class size, or was it the limitations of the fishermen?
This
to
one?
catch, yeah.
Oh.
But I think this one.
This one?
Yeah.
Catch size.
Is that like a disparity with the large class sizes, or was it like a limitation with the fishermen's ability to catch the bigger stuff?
I think it's probably just a disparity. Like, there are fewer fish that are going to get that big. Is that kind of your question? I had the dar and the dar single both plotted there just to kind of see if the distribution of weights were different if you had it just with the individual weights and not average weights, but they look kind of similar.
Yeah, the reason purple and red look like they have so much fewer small fish is just the scale of the axis.
Yeah, it's like a frequency plot. It's not going to be, yeah, it's
If you
just a
blew up
count.
red and purple on a different scale, they would be very similar shape,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you guys for the questions. I think John Brosiak would like to say some words as her mentor.
Okay, thank you very much. And Liz, excellent talk, appreciate it. I don't need a mic.
So you did because it's on the WebEx.
Thank you very much. Basically, I want to first express my sincere appreciation for Liz's work. We handed her about 10 weeks ago a project which was basically to characterize the impact of recreational fisheries in Hawaii on the Pacific blue marlin stock. Well, that's quite a problem. I mean, that's a conservation question. So she generated some evidence for fishery management in 10 weeks. And that she was successful doing that. Why was she successful? What characteristics did she exhibit? Well, she was enthusiastic. One of her emails said to me, please let me know what else I can do. That's characteristic of her pattern. She's also quantitative. She put together 3 very large data sets and provided a very good analysis of them, summary. She's also diligent. So those characteristics led to a successful project. And frankly, I think in 10 weeks from now, I can imagine Liz will be back in Cambridge for her senior year at Harvard University, studying to complete a degree in integrated biology, which is an important way of studying biological systems, looking at various viewpoints on how systems evolve and change through time. So last, I want to thank Liz again and wish her good luck. Noting that luck occurs when her preparation meets opportunity. So thanks and mahalo, Liz.
Great, thank you, Liz. Okay, so moving along, our next speaker will be Taylor Heckman. She is a Hauling Scholar with the Hawaii Monk Seal Research Program, and she will be presenting on, once we get it up, she'll be presenting on the reason for the lesion, interpreting histopathology findings in the Hawaiian monk seals.
Hey. Hello. Yeah, my name is Taylor Heckman, and I'm from Kailua, Oahu, and my project focused on interpreting histopathology data from the Hawaiian monk seal. So I'll be following an outline similar to the other Hollings presenters, going through from the objectives to all the way to acknowledgements. So my objectives were to assign cause of death to reported monk seal mortalities in the main Hawaiian Islands, to analyze the prevalence and significance of morphologic diagnoses, which are short descriptions made by pathologists to describe lesions or abnormalities found in a dead seal, and to further resolve cases that didn't lead to a conclusive cause of death using that information. And so the applications of my study are for future diagnoses and for outreach and policy involved with mitigating threats and spreading ignorance. So some background on the Hawaiian monk seal for those of you who may not know so much about it. And so this is the last remaining species of Neomonachus, as the Caribbean monk seal has been declared extinct. And it's one of the rarest marine animals in the world, with a population of around 1,300. And so this species grows around 6 to 7 feet, 400 to 600 pounds of very charismatic blubber. And has a lifespan of about 25 to 30 years. It's endemic to Hawaii, and its Hawaiian name means the dog that runs in the rough. So the majority of this population lives in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands in the Papahanaumokuakea Marine Monument. And so you may have heard some of that from Kevin earlier, but this is not where most mainlanders think of when they think of the Hawaiian Islands. It's unsurprisingly located to the northwest of the main archipelago, and is more remote and accessible by permit only. So this majority population of around 1,100 seals is actually in decline and has been since the first range-wide count in the 1950s. However, a smaller population that has returned to the main Hawaiian Islands is increasing annually, opening up them to new threats. So in the northwestern, they face issues like shark predation, starvation, and male aggression to a larger degree. And monk seals also have an extremely high rate of entanglement, which affects both the main Hawaiian, but mostly the northwestern, and threats from infectious disease. The main Hawaiian island seals have more exposure to people, which means they interact with their pets, who can spread disease and physically altercate these animals. There are also issues with intentional killings and hookings. So it's clear that involving the public and spreading factual information and appreciation for this species is really important if they're affected by all these anthropogenic things. It's also important because much of the monk seal sighting is done by the public, allowing NOAA to respond mostly through monitoring, but also tagging, sample collection, and intervention when a seal is in danger, or in case of dead animals, through collection of the carcass. So if possible, a monk seal carcass undergoes a gross necropsy, which results in a compilation of macroscopic lesions, which are abnormalities visible by the naked eye, more or less, so a discolored liver or an enlarged spleen. And then typically the tissues are sent to a veterinary pathologist who will look at them microscopically and see any abnormalities at the cellular level, assigning morphologic diagnoses to describe the lesion, where it is in the organ, its physical characteristics, its size, etc., to make a really concise statement that another pathologist or veterinarian can look at and get data and get information from. And so cause of death, COD, is determined looking at that collection of data. However, it's not always easy to find. It's not, especially in terms of issues like drowning, or referred to as paracute underwater entrapment, which has very nonspecific lesions associated with it. And sometimes when you're only looking at a single seal, you may miss information that would be useful to you when assigning cause of death. So in order to get more information on these mortality and morbidity trends, I analyzed necropsy and pathology reports starting in the 1990s and continuing on to the present day from the NOAA database. And I started with main Hawaiian Island seals, using the seals that were originating in the main Hawaiian Islands and were either wild or captive for less than a month at the time of death. These were also confirmed cases, so they were reported and confirmed as dead. Of these seals, a full or a partial necropsy was completed on 88, and histopathology reports were completed on at least on 72. So I analyzed all available information for each of these seals from the gross reports here and the pathology reports here, and made them into, and there are also some spreadsheets already updated. And so I made an updated spreadsheet that consisted of the morphological diagnoses, its organ of the organ where it was, the diagnoses, and the corresponding severity. And then I went through all of these and made a list of every possible diagnoses and created a list of keywords that encompassed any iteration of any possible diagnoses. For example, hepatic lipidosis is also referred to as fatty change or fat degeneration. We then developed a program in R to quantify the number of occurrences of a keyword, both in terms of total occurrences and in number of seals. And then I analyzed that data by going through and defining all of these diagnoses, seeing which are pathologically significant. And by going through this data set, I gained information, and I also was comfortable with the data so I could start assigning causes of death. With the causes of death that weren't clear, I had a whole set of data in which I could compare gross and microscopic lesions in order to assess the unknown cases and see if they fit any patterns of the known causes of death. So, the most common morphological diagnoses were edema, congestion, and hemorrhage. And these are all nonspecific findings. They occur from a variety of reasons across different organs, but may gain more information, may be more prevalent in context. Edema is excess fluid. It was often found in the lung, where it fills the alveoli and prevents normal gas exchange. Congestion refers to abnormal pooling of blood causing darkening and increase in size, and is different from hemorrhage in that the blood stays within the vasculature, whereas hemorrhage implies rupture. Inflammation was identified in many seals across a wide variety of organs, but the most common organ affected was the stomach with gastritis, which makes a lot of sense when you look at the prevalence of parasites that were histologically noted in 18 seals, often accompanied by an ulcer. And these parasites may not, wild seals often have a moderate load, but they may exacerbate issues when the seal also has some sort of nutritional deficiency. And that sort of negative energy balance was indicated in 26 seals. So atrophy, the decrease in size of a tissue or organ, as shown here in a dog's pancreas, may be accompanied in cases of maybe to adipose tissue, or with the pancreas, may be accompanied by pancreatic zymogen depletion, which are proenzymes whose synthesis is depleted in times of energy need in order for proteins to maintain normal serum concentrations. Hepatic lipidosis, or fatty change, involves baculation of the hepatocytes, the liver cells, with triglycerides, and so you can see that in those clear vacuoles, and grossly this makes the liver large, friable, and yellow. Many of the seals were pups when they died, and signs of fetal distress were noticed in 8 pups, and that means from stuff in their lungs that shouldn't be there. So mortality summary, we can see a large anthropogenic effect here, partially because those are usually pretty clear and easier to diagnose. You can see a net, you can see a hook, you can see also with trauma, you can see skull fractures, and we could extend that a little bit into the infectious disease because 7 out of those cases were toxoplasmosis, whose definitive host is the cat, definitely not native to Hawaii. So with those large unknowns, what I did was I compared the unknown to the known series of death, especially in the case of paraacute underwater entrapment. And I adapted signs from Moore et al. Because these are difficult cases that you really have to have a comprehensive look. And so you can see that all of them have a good nutritional state and a lack of other significant findings, so they shouldn't have died. And pulmonary edema is also a sign that fluid in the lungs, and those that didn't have it had significant decomposition of the lungs, so its tissues were so decomposed that could have hindered its detection. So now we can break that large chunk of yellow down some. So we have reason to suspect 12 seals and the known causes of death, and what's left, we either don't have a necropsy or even a gross necropsy, or the tissues were so highly decomposed we may never get a good or complete analysis, and those that are left were just very inconclusive, and we'll see in the future if this builds up to something we can look at again. So yep, in summary, there is a prevalence of non-specific diagnoses that gain importance with context. The gastrointestinal lesions may exacerbate nutritional deficiencies.
Maternal health is important because there's still definitely a risk with births, and there's a marked number of anthropogenic threats indicating the importance of communicating that and mitigating that, and peracute underwater entrapment is likely a larger threat. I think I'm running low on time, so I have a month left. I'll do more things, and yeah. So, and I'd like to say thank you to all of you. You know who you are. You're great, and big mahalos.
Okay, thank you, Taylor. Any questions from the audience?
Were you able to discern a geographical component to the death?
So yeah, I have the atoll code where it was dead. So like 15 is Molokai, and a lot of them, well, not all of them, have in their gross report have recorded what beach they're found at, but I didn't use that particular data other than it was in the main Hawaiian Islands.
I want to compliment her way of giving the presentation, that she took the scientific words, going back to the other one on communication, and you defined your words, Taylor. Thank you for those of us
No
who
problem.
know words. So great job.
They're jargony.
So Michelle and I both got to mentor Taylor, and it was really fun. I just want to say Taylor's actually been with the Monk Seal program longer than I have. She really has, like a lot longer. Taylor actually first came to us as a high school student when her enthusiasm for monk seals and conservation and science won her an essay contest that brought her out to help with some of our critter cam projects long ago. And so I didn't get to meet Taylor then, so I'll let Michelle take over. But I think for our team, it's just been really, really gratifying to see someone come from sort of that, teenage exuberance and enthusiasm to really sort of fledging as a scientist. And it's also really exciting. We already have uses for the results of her study. We've got projects ongoing looking at impacts of all these different mortality sources, and having her flesh out those cases is a really important part of that. So we're excited to use the data from this project.
Great job, Taylor. And building on what Stacy said, it's been a thrill to have her take a look at some really complex sets of data that really take a lot of work to go through and tease out very detailed descriptions, but try to look for big picture trends. And she's done an amazing job. You probably noticed that there were a lot of really long words and veterinary terminology in her presentation. We purchased a brand new pathology textbook that is a doorstopper, to say the least. Taylor knows it better than I think a lot of our pathologists probably know it at this point. So she has taken a really difficult set of information and made it applicable to ongoing research projects, and she's done a really fantastic job. So it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, so our last talk of the session will be Madeline Schultz. She is a PYSO intern from the Marine Turtle Biology and Assessment Program, and she will be presenting on the pelagic residency and age at recruitment for juvenile green turtles in Hawaii, a stable isotope and skeletal chronological analysis.
Sorry about that. So I'm Madeline Schultz, and I'll be presenting on pelagic residency and age at recruitment for juvenile green turtles in Hawaii, a stable isotope and skeleto-chronological analysis. And I was under the guidance of my mentors, T. Todd Jones, Sean Marakawa, and Devin, who's still my mentor even though he wasn't there. So the life cycle of the Hawaiian green turtle is a closed system. 96% of green sea turtle hatchlings come from the French frigate shoals, which are a little hard to see. These hatchlings then spend the next couple years of their life in the epipelagic or oceanic habitat, eating gelatinous zooplankton and eustonic organisms. They then, sometime in their juvenile life stage, they're then induced to recruit to a nearshore or neritic environment, typically around the main Hawaiian Islands. And there they change their diet to one primarily feeding upon seagrass, algae, and invertebrates.
Once they have this diet transition, they then move as adults to their foraging grounds, which are still nearshore environments. And they return to the French Frigate Shoals for mating and nesting. Though much is known about the adult breeding grounds for Hawaiian sea turtles, less is known about the juvenile habitats, residency times, recruitment ages, maturation ages, and that's still more equally as, if not more important, for population dynamics. So there are several ways of getting data about the juvenile life histories, and some of these ways include mark recapture studies, satellite tagging, and skeletochronology. So the technique of skeletochronology allows age and growth rates of sea turtles to be calculated with less time and less effort than the previously mentioned ways. And it functions because much of the life history data is actually stored within the bones of the turtle, much like it's stored within a tree ring, although there is a reabsorption core that takes the older rings away. And so their life history is essentially carried with them. And here, as I've shown, like tree rings, these lines of arrested growth are put down annually as a marker of growth. And within them, they contain all the information about what they've eaten that year and such things. While it's a relatively new technique, previous studies have found no significant difference between different carapace lengths measured at tagging and those estimated through skeletochronology. So this project aims to improve our understanding of this life history stage in the early ecology of green turtles. We are interested in diet shifts of juvenile turtles as they recruit from an oceanic realm to a neritic one. Through the collection of green sea turtles through the Marine Turtle Biology and Assessment Program's Stranding Network, we will use skeletochronology techniques to section humerus bones from juvenile turtles and then age them. We will then use a micromill to sample bone material along the same growth lines that we use to age them. And from there, we can use diet and environmental changes between the years that result in differences in the carbon and nitrogen signatures of the milled sample and allow us to determine that they recruited to a new environment and then by their age, at what age. So, like any research project, we began by preparing a sample set. In order to prepare the bones, we chose 30 bones representative of 3 groups. The first group consisted of turtles we received that were caught by long-lining ships. These are considered to be juvenile turtles that have yet to recruit to a nearshore environment, and those that you see there, other than the bottom one that is significantly larger, are all long-lining bones. The second group are those which we believe to be recent recruits. We had them from the Stranding Network. They stranded on islands, and they still have relatively small straight carapace lengths. The final group is the humeri of turtles that are suspected to have been living in nearshore environments for a longer time now, and they typically have larger straight carapace lengths. We prepared them by first cleaning them after we chose them. We cleaned them, and then we boiled them, and the boiling served as a purpose of removing any meat and cartilage that we couldn't remove before. Then we dried them in a fume hood for 30 days, and then we measured them. And the most important measurement for us was actually the minimum width, and that's where we would sample from in that area. So the minimum width actually has also the most lines and the smallest reabsorption core. So in this picture you can see some of the reabsorption core right around there. So after preparing the bones, we began to section them across the bones in order to be able to count the lines that actually encircle the core. We used the isomet low-speed saw, as you can see right under, and we used that to section into 1 to 3 millimeter sections of bone. We then decalcified them, and they become pliable, and subsequently used the microtome, which you can see over here, to actually section them into 25 micrometer sections, which are very small, but you'll see that on the next slide. And so what we actually do, this is a freezing stage microtome, so we actually freeze the bone to the stage using this gel down here so that it stays put when we're trying to slide across and cut it really thin. So after sectioning it with the microtome, we then decalcified again only for 24 hours. And this decalcification step is actually incredibly important to ensure proper staining and sectioning. And in troubleshooting, we did have to troubleshoot this a bit because the decalcification time is different with each bone and its thickness, and just each bone decides to be a little more troublesome or not. So while it is possible to see the lines of arrested growth without staining, seeing these lines is much simpler if the bone is well stained. And as you can see, those up there have been microtoned and decaled, but not stained, and the ones below them have been stained. This one is a little more troublesome. But this is a very important step. So the stain we used, we made in lab, was Elric's hematoxylin. And this step has been very troublesome because getting the best recipe in conjunction with the optimal decalcified time and the method of staining has been quite elusive. And without all of this, the lines of arrested growth are hard to see. They can actually be inverted. So as you can see, as you will see, and as you can kind of see here, the lines should be darker than the surrounding tissue, and in some of them they aren't, they're actually lighter. So this is a photographed bone. After photographing them, which we do once we've stained them, which generally is actually about 30 photographs per bone, which we then compile, we can then look at the actual full lines that surround the core of the bone. And this image is a stained section of a 43.9 centimeter SCL of the humerus one. And so those lines that are marked with the red are actually, those are the lines of arrested growth that you can follow around the core. So this is kind of what we've been trying to obtain in our newer samples. So previous studies using skeletal chronology, which a lot of them have been done by my mentor, which is great, have resulted in strong evidence of a relationship between straight carapace length and the width of the humerus at the sectioning site. So full aging requires the use of all this information, including this graph, as well as various algorithms that I don't fully understand, that allow for the estimation of lags and the lines that are reabsorbed or just a little confusing, that are hard to see, or that don't go all the way around the bone. So this paper right here, the Termer-Tomaszewicz paper, cited here, established a standard protocol for the sequential bone growth layer sampling for a stable carbon-13 and nitrogen-15 isotope analysis. And it proved such techniques useful in addressing fundamental questions in diet, migration, habitat use, because the inert layers of hard tissues preserve their original chemical composition, thereby reflecting the stable isotopes, the values of the environment and the prey consumed during that year in which the line was laid. So their preferred protocol is actually the one we will be using to analyze the stable isotopes within the bones. So in sea turtle research, the use of nitrogen may seem more simple than the use of carbon because it's a marker of trophic level. We expect to see a downward trend in nitrogen-15 as the turtles transition their diet to primary users from low-level consumers. And so despite this, stable carbon-13 values, they do alter in a marine environment. So benthic environments are more enriched with carbon-13 than pelagic, and northern oceans are more enriched in comparison to southern ocean. And one other important consideration to keep in mind is that isotope turnover rates are different for each species. So for example, reptiles, like turtles are marine reptiles, have a slower turnover rate, as well as bones have a slower turnover rate than metabolically active tissues. So all of this exact rate of carbon and nitrogen is unknown and will play a part in determining which isotope is used and how we analyze and interpret the data. And then there are various implications for our data. Unfortunately, we have not fully realized the results of our data, but there are so many implications, and we're currently working to essentially improve upon these. So some questions that could come up are there differences in growth spurts at various points of life history? Are they stress-linked? How detrimental are these shifts in diet? And also another important thing to keep in mind is that this method is widely applicable for a number of species that undergo transitions, but they have to be done at the population level because each population does have its distinct features. And then acknowledgements.
So for the rings in the bones, like it makes sense to me why trees have rings because they're seasoned. Why are the bones annual in a turtle? Like what happens to cause that?
Well, they still have seasons, so there's still a winter season for many turtles, and so they still undergo less. Essentially, it is still a seasonal change.
Okay, thanks.
Great presentation. Can you, as with trees, following on Phoebe's question, different rainy seasons will cause growing trees to grow faster or not. Can you correlate the differences in the rings with the turtle and its growth based on, I don't know, changes in temperature or food quality or anything like that?
So I'm not sure about temperature, but I have a feeling that food quality does impact it, although my mentor Sean did growth spurts, so I'm sure she's more able to answer that than I am. But I would think that it would definitely have a similar effect.
I feel like a proud parent. It's a long process that she had to work on. So a lot of the projects here, people had data to work with, but she had to actually collect her own data. And to even do that, it was this long process that she did, as she's shown in the methods. But I just want to, I guess, brag a little bit about her. She is a double major in biology and environmental studies with a minor in government, but she is also a pole vaulter at Bowdoin College on the track team. She's been very pleasant to work with. She's been my lab mate for the past 2 months. And when she's gone, I'll probably miss her a lot because it's so quiet in the lab by yourself. But she's very hardworking, very dedicated, and more than willing to put in the extra work. I actually had to send her home one day when she was really sick. She was determined to get the job done, and I said, no, just go home, don't worry about the data, it'll always be there. So it's been a pleasure working with you, and we have about a month left with you. And just remember her name, because I'm pretty sure she's gonna be out there in some kind of publication later on.
Just 3 points real quick. One of them is sometimes you go into a field and you think all the neat stuff has been done. But in actuality, a lot of times we get it wrong the first, second, or third time. And there's a lot of old questions like, how old am I? Where was I born? Even what species I am? They're just waiting for the right technique. And for example, things like DNA barcoding right now are unraveling a lot of things, species that were all considered different species and now are one, or the reverse. And now with this technique, you can identify juveniles and larvae and even eggs. So a lot of times, these old questions just await a new technique for you to adapt and use. The other thing is networking. And I was just at a conference where about half of the society there were graduate students. And I noticed all the graduate students were talking with each other about maybe moving on to a PhD, and they were asking each other who were the good professors. I think that this is a perfect opportunity not only to network with professors, but if you have the chance to go to a conference that's in your topic, do it. Because it'll provide you the opportunity to talk with other graduate students, find out what a particular professor is like, and where you might be the best match for you. And maybe the third thing is, a lot of us got into the field by basically being naturalists. And when you think about it, all the big scientific revolutionary discoveries were from naturalists, whether they were biologists, astronomers, geologists, whatever. And as we advance in our career, a lot of times we tend to dismiss that, or we just are, for whatever reasons, we're not connected with the field as much as we used to. And the naturalist point of view can be a great inspiration for new ideas and ways of thinking that. So as you proceed in your careers, just remember what kind of brought you here, your natural wonder, and try and keep that with you as you advance in your career.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming back after lunch. My name is Risa Oram, and I work with the Pacific Island Fisheries Science Center, and I work in science operations. And I have a distinct pleasure to introduce the next group. They're a multidisciplinary group from the UC, University of California School, Bren School of Environment. And they're working on a project called Bridging Science and Management in the Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monument. They're working under Rusty Brainerd and Hoku Ka'akuahivi, sorry, butcher your last name. And I'm just going to introduce all of them, and as they come up, they're going to do a talk. They're going to pass the mic back and forth to one another. So we have Monique Schaefer, Erin O'Reilly, Kara Koenig, sorry, and Shannon Boyle.
Okay, hi everyone and welcome. I hope everyone had a good lunch break. So my team and I are here to present Bridging Science and Management in the Pacific Remote Islands. So, I'm guessing you guys have heard rumblings about these Bren students. And so we are the Bren students. My name is Erin. This is Kara, Shannon, and Monique. And we actually have a fifth member of our team, Vanessa, as you can see in the far right of our picture. But she is currently doing a different internship in San Francisco. So, as she said, we all go to the Bren School of Environmental Science and Management, which is located at UC Santa Barbara. And this is a very interdisciplinary program. So they're trying to train us in science, management, communication, economics, etc., so that we can be successful managers in the future. So Bren is also a little bit different than a typical master's project. So instead of ending with an individual thesis, we actually end with a group project. So that is basically why we are here at NOAA. For this group project, what happens is we work with a real-world client and we help them solve a problem. So that is how we ended up partnering with NOAA. And so this was our proposal. So this whole process started back in January when Shannon reached out to Rusty and was like, Rusty, do you have any projects that we could work on with you? And so this whole idea came forward because Pyro has to write a management plan for the Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monument. And so in order to write that management plan, they need a monitoring report to see the health of the resources. So that's basically why we're here. So we wrote this proposal, and the proposal includes our objectives, background, significance of the project, and some of the deliverables that will end up coming in March. So our primary project objectives, just very broadly, you can obviously read them on the screen, they've changed a little bit, but the first one is to analyze and synthesize all of the data that has been collected on the ramp cruises. So currently we have 16 years of data in the Pacific Remote Islands. Our next one is related to the management side of things. So from this monitoring report that we create, influencing the management decisions there. And then the last one is going to be communication and outreach. So as Megan was talking about earlier, it's very important to end up communicating all of these results to the general public. So this is our study region. If you guys are not familiar, the Pacific Remote Islands are these ones in green. It was first designated in 2009 by President Bush, and it was then expanded by Obama in 2014. And this marine protected area is one of the largest in the world. It covers 490 square miles. And these 490,000 square miles. it's bigger. And these islands are relatively uninhabited. So the only people that live there, there's some research scientists that go to, say, Palmyra to study sharks. There has been some military presence on these islands, but they're relatively uninhabited. So there's not many human impacts to these areas. But even with this, there's differences between the islands. For Johnston, Agent Orange was disposed of at Johnston. So their ecosystem is seeing the effects of that. Kingman doesn't even have dry land. And there's just like really interesting differences between all of these islands. So a little bit about the data that we're going to end up analyzing and synthesizing. So all of this data was collected through all of the RAMP cruises, which is the Reef Assessment and Monitoring Program. And basically the point of these cruises is to go out and get a general sense of what is going on in those ecosystems. So this is when the towed diver surveys happen, when OCC deploys all of their instruments, and we do like fish counts and stuff like that. So this is really to get from microbes all the way to oceanographic characteristics. It's to get a broad idea of what is happening in all these places. And as I said, we have 16 years of data to go through for the Pacific Remote Islands. So this is really going to give us the opportunity to track how things have changed over time and how things will change in the future. So a little bit about levels of synthesis. So this has been described to us as the wedding cake. So for all of the RAMP data, that is that big chunk at the bottom that is named data. So this is like all of the surveys and everything like that. And then from there, you go up to the monitoring report, which is a little bit more synthesized, and this is all of the graphs and figures that we are currently creating. And then you synthesize it even more to the overview booklet, which basically takes, here's an example. So this is a monitoring report for American Samoa. This is only 500 pages. The Marianas one was 1,000, and that was only for 3 years of data. So since we have 16, it's going to be very big and very long. And this is an example of the overview booklet. As you can see, it's roughly 40 pages, and it goes through like island highlights, and the graphs and figures are more easily to understand. And then after that, there's a report card, which is going to be a roughly 5 to 6 page document that gives things like fish biomass, grades A through F, to kind of assess how the ecosystem is doing and how it will change over time. So to go through how all of these levels are useful to people. So for the first one, for the report card, this is great for the general public and policymakers. So for the general public, they understand that an F means bad and an A means good. So this is a really easy way for them to look at all of these different ocean characteristics to see how they're doing in these areas. And then policymakers don't want to read a 1,000-page document. They want something quick and easy, so the report card is a great way to show that. Next is the overview booklet. So as I said, this is like more simplified graphs and figures from the monitoring report, and this is what's going to be great for managers. So we're currently working on creating this for PIRO and for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So they're really going to be able to get an idea, a broad idea of what's going on these islands and what they can do to manage them. And then the last two chunks, the big ones, the monitoring report and the data, are really there for the scientists. So it just depends on what they want to get out of all this information. So the monitoring report is more for answer-driven scientists. So if they're like, I want to know what coral cover is on Kingman, they can go to that specific chapter, that specific page, and look at it. But if they're more interested in raw data and doing analysis themselves, then they have this whole big data chunk. So a little bit about the metrics that are going into our project, into this whole monitoring report. So we were divided into 4 different teams here. I'm on the ESI team, which is the Ecospatial and Information team. Shannon is on the fish team. Kara is on the OCC team, which stands for Ocean Acidification and Climate Change, and then Monique is on the benthic team. So to go through some of these metrics, and these are metrics that are going to be included in that big monitoring report. So for ESI, we're going to do things like bathymetry, slope, rugosity, which is basically like the roughness of the terrain. We're going to do some pseudobathymetry where we derive depth from satellite imagery. And then for the fish team, they're going to do species richness, large fish biomass, and total fish biomass. And then the benthic team is going to do coral cover, Costas coralline algae cover, go into coral bleaching, and then go into some of the invertebrates like cranophthalurine sea stars and giant clams. And then the OCC team has a lot of different instruments that they deploy, but some of the main ones they're going to focus on are temperature data and carbonate data, which is going to go through carbonate accretion rates and arachnid saturation.
Okay, so I'm going to introduce how we're going to be looking at all of this different data a little bit, and then we'll all talk about some of the things that we've produced so far and what we're going to do next. So as you may be able to realize now, the PRIM are extremely unique due to their remoteness and lack of significant human presence. They also really stand out compared to all the other islands that are managed under RAMP or surveyed under RAMP because of various, condition or characteristics of all these different resources. Unfortunately, not all of the islands in the Pacific share these same characteristics. A lot of them, as we all know, living on Oahu, are extremely impacted by human presence. So the first scale, we're going to look at all the different resources that we have available to us is at the archipelagic scale. So really trying to look at where the PRIM fit in between, within all of the islands in the Pacific. So for this comparison, the only real comparison we have available right now is fish biomass. So as you can see, fish biomass, RAMP measures fish biomass using 2 different methods. SPC, which is stationary point count, and tow diver surveys, which measures large fish biomass. On the right here is total fish biomass, which actually excludes many large fishes like sharks and jacks because they're generally overestimated in the biomass estimates for this measure. And then on the left over there is exactly those large fish that are left out of the SPC, like sharks and jacks, basically everything over 50 centimeters. The Prim Islands are highlighted in purple compared to all of the other archipelagos under ramp. And as you can see from both of these figures, they really stand out as having these really high measures of, or high fish biomass in both of these measures. And unfortunately, places like Oahu here and Molokai, which is the very last one over there, which I think might be cut off, really don't show this same pattern at all. This is really interesting. Like, this is exactly why places like this, with such pristine islands, are really interesting for managers and such a focus for effective management strategies. And also interesting is this light green and this dark green here just happen to be some of the other uninhabited islands in the Pacific Island region. The Northwest Hawaiian Islands, the light, and then the Northern Marianas. So the next scale we're going to look at is, after we've looked at this archipelagic scale, we're going to shrink it down a little bit and look at within the monument. So how these islands compare to each other, and then how these patterns compare within each of these islands.
All right, so first I'm going to give a broad comparison of sea temperature. So these are subsurface sea temperature recorders, all at 15 meters in the Prim. But before I talk about temperature, I wanted to briefly touch upon Prim, the location again, and then the currents that influence these temperatures. So in the Prim, the two northernmost islands are Wake and Johnston. They're influenced mostly by the westward flowing north equatorial current, and they are oligotrophic, so they are more low nutrient islands than the other ones. The two ones below that are Kingman and Palmyra. So they again are influenced by the north equatorial current and also by the equatorial countercurrent that flows eastward. Below that are Howland and Baker and Jarvis. These islands lie closest to the equator. So they are influenced on the surface level by the south equatorial current, and then also on the subsurface level, like 50 to 200 meters, by the equatorial undercurrent. This current is very strong and brings a lot of upwelling to these areas, particularly Jarvis, because it's very, very close to the equator. So upwelling, it brings cooler, dense, nutrient-rich waters up to the surface, replacing warmer, less nutrient-rich waters. Because they are so close to the equator, they are often exposed to great changes, such as during warming events like El Nino, and I will touch upon that with Jarvis and this past year's El Nino when we go into island highlights. But for now, if you guys just look at this figure on the right-hand side, you can see seasonal variations with temperature, but mainly if you look at Howland Jarvis right here, you can see there's like a greater temperature gradient, and in Jarvis it even goes to low 20 degrees. And in the 2010, you can see that it goes above the coral bleaching threshold for Howland Jarvis, and if we had the data there at Baker for this particular 15-meter depth site, I'm sure you could see the same thing. These two lines, the dotted line is the maximum mean monthly temperature. So this is the maximum temperature for each month of each year, and then the mean of all of those for each island. So these lines are different per island. And then the line above that is the coral bleaching threshold. So that is 1 degree Celsius above that line. Again, I will go into Jarvis and show this past year and how there was great temperature stress, and it was above the coral bleaching threshold for a long period of time. But this was just to give a broad comparison of temperature in the Prim. So next, I will be talking about the carbonate accretion rate. So carbonate accretion rate in the Prim is measured via COWs, which are an oceanographic instrument that is deployed. And you can see on the bottom left, these are two COWs. The one on the left side right here is one that's newly deployed, and then the one to the right of it, right here, is one that has been deployed for 2 years. So it's found with crustose coralline algae and encrusting corals. And how they measure this carbonate accretion rate is they calculate it by measuring the change in weight of cows over the amount of time that it was deployed. Why is carbonate accretion rate important? Well, corals, as most of you probably know, use calcium carbonate to build their skeleton. So for now and in the future, it's going to be important as, you know, the oceans absorb more carbon dioxide. It's going to change the carbonate chemistry. It'll lower the pH and it will lower the amount of carbonate ions in the water, and it will make it a lot harder for corals to build this skeleton. So it will be interesting to see in the future how corals will adapt to this and if the carbonate accretion rate will exceed the bioerosion rate, or the rate at which calcium carbonate is broken down by biorotors such as algae. In the prim, you can see this is just a mean per site throughout 2012 to 2015. The two oligotrophic islands, Johnston and Wake, you can see that their carbon accretion rate values are quite a bit smaller than the rest of the islands. But again, Wake only has one measurement from 2014. That's when the cow was recovered, as comparison to the rest of the islands. And yes, I believe that is all for that slide. So yeah, it'll be really interesting to see in the future with the carbonate accretion rate and how that will be influenced by ocean acidification.
Again, I will go into a few of the metrics that the fish team is going to look at. First is species richness, one of the greatest diversity measures. This shows the species richness and sampling effort for all of the different islands for fish species in the Prim. Some of the most interesting patterns here is definitely Johnston, which is the most northern and eastern island from the Coral Triangle, which also happens to be the center of fish richness or fish diversity in the oceans. And as you get farther and farther away from the Coral Triangle, you lose a lot of the fish diversity in that area. And so Johnston, as you can see, definitely has like the lowest fish diversity, and is definitely the one that, although not actually plateauing, does seem to be the only one that really is getting very close to plateauing, meaning we're almost at the total fish sampling saturation rate, and there's not all that much diversity left to really find at Johnston. Wake is a close second, although definitely more diverse than Johnston. It's definitely at a similar latitude, northern-wise, but also closer to the Coral Triangle, being more westerly than Johnston. Another really interesting pattern here is Baker. Although having fewer sampling sites than many of the other islands like Kingman and Palmyra, Baker is already surpassing these other islands for numbers of species found at Baker. Baker also happens to be highly productive in this equatorial high eutrophic zone, and so it's really just has this super steep slope and it's nowhere near plateauing, meaning there's a lot of fish diversity left to find on the island, and many of the others as well. So next, after we look at the fish species richness, we're going to look at fish biomass collected via these two different methods. So total fish biomass, but also large fish biomass. This is kind of an information overload, but so far this is all sampling sites using the SPC, stationary point count, stratified random method, on all of these islands across from 2010 to 2015, and the years are a little off for Wake, so Wake is 2011 to 2014, just because it's on a different cruise leg. So with these metrics, biomass for fish, we're interested in not only the spatial patterns, but also how this metric has changed over time. And because this is a little intense, we're going to look at large fish biomass, which is just a little bit clearer. So first, I'll talk a little bit about the spatial patterns. So although islands like Jarvis, Baker, Howland are extremely productive, other islands like Johnston in particular, and Wake as well, are less productive naturally, so they would have lower fish biomass, or large fish biomass. But unfortunately, when you look at the patterns over time, islands like Johnston and Wake really stand out as declining large fish biomass over time. And from very, very extremely preliminary analysis, we can look at potential trends over time. And although for the majority of these islands, the data is extremely noisy, Johnston actually is not very noisy at all and does show a significant decline in large fish biomass over the study period from 2004 to 2015, unfortunately. So after we look at the kind of broad picture of large fish or fish biomass, both total and large fish, we're going to scale it down again a little bit and look at components of the fish community. And in order to do this, we break the fish community up into 4 meaningful trophic groups: piscivores, so fish eating fish; planktivores, plankton eating fish; primary consumers; and secondary consumers, different levels of herbivorous fishes. And so this is just another way to visualize how different groups change over time for each of these islands. And this is another way to visualize these patterns over space and time, but also gives us an opportunity to look at how the environment shapes different levels of the fish community.
Okay, so as mentioned earlier, I am on the benthic team, and I've just sort of completed the preliminary portion of the toad diver surveys. So this figure shows both the temporal trends and the spatial trends in coral cover in the 14 years of data that we have. Good news is that there's not a whole lot of change over time in coral cover. However, spatially, there's definitely trends. Baker and Howland definitely have the highest percentage of coral cover, whereas Johnston has the very lowest in the cooler colors, and warm colors are the higher coral cover. And this is an interpolated mean weighted distance done spatially, so it's the mean coral cover for each of the toad diver tracks during the 14 years. This is the same representation, spatial and temporal, of the crustose coralline algae cover, which, as many of you guys know, is really important for forming the framework of coral reefs. Again, not a lot of temporal trends. However, the spatial trends, Wake definitely having the lowest coralline algae cover, whereas Baker, Jarvis, and Howland have higher crustose coralline algae cover. This is stressed coral, and there's definitely 2 main standouts, and that's Baker and Howland, and it definitely lines up with Kara's temperature data. So you see very high stress in 2010 for both Baker and Howland, and it really stands out, whereas the other years and for the other islands, it really stays under 10%. Oh, and the stressed coral is a percentage of the total live coral cover.
Okay. So now we're going to go into some of the island highlights. So during our analysis, things that we found were pretty interesting. I'm going to start off on a bit of a depressing note, but I swear it will get more exciting. Well, not exciting, it's really still exciting even though it's sad. But more uplifting for some of the other islands as we go along. So starting off with island highlights, I'm going to talk about Jarvis and this past year's El Nino. So I'm assuming most of you, or hopefully all of you, know what El Nino is. And El Nino, warmer than average temperatures oscillating back and forth across the Pacifics, particularly equatorial Pacific. So like I mentioned earlier, since Jarvis is so close to the equator, it is extremely exposed to great changes during warming events such as El Nino. So these are, again, subsurface temperature recorders. They were taken, this green right here, on the west side of Jarvis. So these are 2 Jarvis sites right on top of each other, one at 6 meters and one at 13 meters. And this is on the west side, so that equatorial undercurrent that usually brings that upwelling to Jarvis. Well, in the past, during El Ninos, it has been observed to weaken and even at sometimes reverse during these warming events. So like during this past year's El Nino, you can see throughout time, this is from April 2010 to November of 2015, it relatively stayed below the coral bleaching threshold. And then this past fall in 2015, it was above the coral bleaching threshold, and it stayed that way for months. So when when coral are exposed to this amount of temperature stress for such long periods of times, corals can turn from something on the right in 2013 in Jarvis to this picture, on the left, to this picture on the right-hand side, which was just taken this past May in 2016 on the last cruise. So unfortunately, a lot of Jarvis's coral reefs have coral bleaching occur, and there was estimated to be around 95% coral death at Jarvis. So it'll be really interesting to see in the years to come what will happen with Jarvis's coral reefs and the recovery process that will occur here. And now, brighter notes.
All right. So the benthic team looks at macroinvertebrate data for target species are giant clams, sea urchins, sea cucumbers, and then the crown of thorns sea stars. So giant clams are what really makes Kingman, one of the islands, super unique. They are an IUCN threatened species, so they are important for management within the islands, and historically they've been fished throughout the Pacific as they're considered a delicacy, and then the clam shells themselves are like decorations. So not a lot of temporal trends, which is a great thing. The 2015 there is a decline, but if you look at the map, there's not any towed diver tracks in the southeastern portion where the clam gardens actually are. So that's the reason for the decline. I'm guessing there was probably weather related why we didn't get data that year. But there's as many as 100 organisms per 100 square meters in this southeastern portion of the island, which is pretty big and pretty cool. It's beautiful. Crown of thorns sea stars are a species of concern. They can do significant, they're one of the biggest, they can cause one of the biggest biological disturbances to an area. And they're known to have outbreaks after like certain El Nino, hurricanes, rising sea surface temperatures have been known to lead to outbreaks. So it's important to know where these outbreaks are occurring over time and the temporal trends along with and integrate it with the ocean and climate data to see when these sea stars are occurring most. And at Jarvis, you can see the highest densities of the sea stars in 2010 when there was temperature stress.
So for my little island highlight, I chose to highlight an interesting large parrotfish pattern at Wake. And as you can see here, this shows temporal trends of large parrotfish biomass, so parrotfish over 50 centimeters from the tow diver surveys at each of the islands. And for most of them, although they change here and there a little bit, they're relatively low and relatively constant. And it's quite obvious how much Wake stands out with the large parrotfish biomass. But another thing that also stands out with Wake is this quite large decline of large parrotfish in the most recent year of survey. So this is definitely of interest to managers. Parrotfish are relatively highly sought after recreational fishery, but they also serve a very profound ecological role. And so potential declines this year, and who knows what's going to happen in the future, are definitely something that would be of interest to managers. So me again. So after we have all of this environmental data and all of this analysis done on all these different components of the ecosystem, one of the most important things that we will be doing and are kind of doing now is looking at how all of these different components work together to shape the community and shape the ecosystem on a whole. So right now, just within this last week, or kind of for the last month, I've been working on a project looking at main environmental drivers of fish assemblage in the Prim. Although, you know, there's so much research done on how the environment shapes fish communities, one of the really interesting things that we have at that's available to us is looking at environmental drivers at the site level rather than on an island level or on an archipelagic level. So far, I've been developing a project looking at the site level data we have available, including depth and wave energy, as well as biological predictors like coral cover and bentham complexity and a few other predictors as well on various levels of the fish community, including species richness and biomass of different groups. And in the future, we'll probably be looking at various diversity matrices and other groups that I will define that are either ecologically important or recreationally important for a management focus. And analysis like this will hopefully use it to kind of draw a map of or predict the presence of various groups of fishes that are important for managers, so they can use that information to help manage these ecosystems. On the right is the figure from my very preliminary analysis looking at 7 different drivers of piscivore biomass and species richness. So far, from what I have so far is the main environmental drivers are depth, which makes total sense, and hard coral cover. And if everything goes according to plan, I'll include more site level predictors in this analysis and hopefully help inform some management. So, you now.
All right. So again, we're really trying to add new indicators, and Rusty touched on this earlier, but we're hoping to analyze the microbial community data available to us from San Diego State, and as well as the cryptobiota from the ARMS that the OCC team deploys. And this is really trying to get us to look at the ecosystem more from a bottom-up perspective rather than a top-down perspective. So we're really hoping to get that into the monitoring report, both spatial trends most likely for these, to really bring it all together. And we're going to have a lot of information, so we're really going to take some time to think of new ways to integrate it, and we touched on this earlier, so we're just sort of really honing in on it. And we're going to try and use what was used in past monitoring reports, such as this report card, easy to interpret, red being bad, green being good, clear states of the ecosystem. And then we'll put it in an overview report and a report card, and hopefully at the end develop a nice outreach strategy to get people excited about all the information that comes out of NOAA and this special place. Oh, and at the end of the summer, we really hope to have this monitoring report completed.
Just kidding, guys. So there's absolutely no way we will have the monitoring report done by the end of the summer. But real end of summer goals, we hope to have all of our maps and figures completed from our analysis. So hopefully when we get back to Santa Barbara in the fall, we can get going on the draft of the overview and then, the draft of the overview and have it completed by December. So these are our long-term goals. And I just mentioned the first one. By January and February, we plan on creating our outreach materials. Erin has already started in the process of thinking of layouts and how to create this story map, how to present our information in the best way possible. March, we will be giving our master's defense. So like we said, we're not just, although we're only here till September, we are going to be working on this project throughout the next year. So we're going to be working on it all the way up until our master's defense. And if you guys want to fly to Santa Barbara in April, we will be giving our public presentations, and you will not regret flying out for our public presentation. So if you want to keep up to date on our project, I created this project, our project website. That's the link there, and this is our homepage, but it has more about each of us if you're interested, more about the project, the prim. We have a blog that we try to do bi-weekly, and contact information for us if you guys want to contact us. So, mahalo, thanks to everyone so much. We feel really grateful that we have this amazing opportunity to do this with NOAA, and we're just really looking forward to what will come of our project in the next year. So thanks, everyone.
There we go. I was interested in the stress coral data from Baker and Howland, and the percentages that you list are in the 30s to 40s. And I was just wondering what your definition of stress in that case is. Does that mean bleached, or does that mean diseased? What does that mean?
I don't think it's entirely bleached. I think it's just a general stress category. That's what it's listed in the data set as stressed. But the REA data is going to do actual bleaching prevalence. I just have not gotten around to that data.
Okay, thank you.
Can you explain more about what happened to Johnson Island or whatever, Atoll, and why it's so kind of messed up?
Jarvis, you say?
No,
Johnston.
Johnston.
The history.
So for Johnston, they actually disposed of Agent Orange there, and then they have also dredged all the places around the island. So that's why there's very low coral cover, because most of it's been dredged. So the island is just very sad.
There's actually, from what I understand, there was no real dry land on Johnston, really, originally, and they actually dredged a lot of the coral to build basically runways for military presence and various other activities. I'm not exactly sure. So if you actually go on Google Maps, I learned this, you can, Google Maps, and look at the satellite view on Johnston, you can see evidence of the coral dredging, and it's just big sweeps, right next to what are the little islands on Johnston. It's pretty intense.
Thank you, ladies. Excellent presentation. I was just wondering what the kind of future timeline for monitoring of the Pacific Remote Islands will be, because I assume there hasn't been a monitoring report in the past since you're doing so much, so many years of data. But I know, for example, American Samoa, the period was, I believe, 2002 to 2006. So is there going to be a more periodic assessment after you've completed going through the data that we have so far, or do you know about the future of that?
Do you mean when the next surveys are going to happen?
Not the next surveys, but the next monitoring report. So building on the baseline.
That's a great question, because I'm not exactly sure if American Samoa or the Marianas have any plans for producing another monitoring report. I don't know what the timeline is for these things, because they really do set this baseline, and then temporal trends can be kind of extrapolated on top of that. So right now we have 16 years of data, and I think American Samoa and Marianas were put together at their time of, how many years they had available to them for this data, and I'm not exactly sure. That's a good question.
Thanks. Okay.
I think, sorry, one more. In order for it to be really meaningful or worth the amount of time put into it, I guess if everything's already produced, you just add a little bit more data, and it's not that bad, but it takes a lot of time to produce these reports, so doing it within 10 years seems almost difficult, or not, I don't know, not worth it, maybe.
Right. Thank you.
Maybe not.
I would just like to thank Aaron, Shannon, Monique, and Kara for a tremendous amount of work that they have been doing from the Science Center side, as well as I think the Pacific Remote Islands Center side. I think we're very fortunate to be able to collaborate with the Bryn School and to have gotten such great students working with us. And a little bit following up on that last question, one of the things we've struggled with is we're funded to collect these information, but we don't actually have funding to produce these sort of management reports. The previous ones, the one for the Marianas was actually funded by the Navy because they were having some needs for that same information. There is the Coral Reef Conservation Program has a science evaluation meeting next month actually, where one of the things they're talking about is how to get information all the way through from collection to actual use and management. And what's needed are those other layers of the wedding cake. What they've funded so far is just the top layer and the bottom layer. Most of management occurs in those middle two layers. The policymakers is really Congress. So what they're working on is really, really important. And quite honestly, when Pyro came to us to do that, it was like January, they came to us, can you do this for the Pacific Remote Islands? We used the one that you did for the Marianas extensively in developing that monument management plan. And of course, we didn't have any resources to do that. The opportunity to work with Bren and these great students for a year has really enabled us to actually be able to do this very ambitious project. And this is a huge undertaking that through this collaboration is happening, and we couldn't have been luckier with the collection of students that we've gotten and how hard they're working and how committed they obviously are. They've only been here for about 5 weeks now. They came middle of June, and they've already produced hundreds of figures. I mean, they were for this. We're only able to show a few of them. Have been in tons of meetings as we tried to develop the template so it can becoming kind of mass production. But I think it's going to be something like 1,600 figures to go in these reports. It's a huge amount of effort, a huge amount of data, and this is now a much longer period of time than those other ones, as they indicated, going from the first surveys in 2000, 2001 to the most recent surveys in 2016. So a really extensive effort. So I really want to thank all of you for the tremendous effort and look forward to working with you through March and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't know I was going to be talking, but since it's a small audience, I feel fine with this. Like Rusty was saying, these students have been so great. Every time I see them, I learn something new, and I'm like, shucks, I'm supposed to be like mentoring them and helping them, but they've taught us a lot, especially from a science perspective. And so on that last question about follow-up assessments, these reports will be used to develop a management plan for this area. And from there, we're hoping that we can establish a better assessment period after that. And so that's kind of to be discussed once we are able to go over all the information that these students are processing for us. So thank you all for coming to watch their presentation, and thank you guys for being awesome.
I would just like to also thank almost all of the Coral Reef Ecosystem Program is actually involved with this project because it's the data from every one of our teams, and as they mentioned, they're assigned to different teams, but I'd like to just thank all of the team members for their significant help, and a lot of the mentorship is actually at the team level, so I'd like to thank all of those folks as well for making this happen. Thank you guys.
Okay, thank you, Don. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Great. Well, so I'm just going to say a little bit about myself. So I'm in the regional office for the management side, but also work closely with a lot of people in the Science Center. And just got through with science camp for middle schoolers and had a lot of people in the audience that were helping, including a lot of the interns for that. I got all of them to say that science is cool, and they were very excited about it by the end of the week. So yes, we'll get started on our last 4 of the day. So we're going to have Jasmine Hanello from the University of Hawaii Hilo coming up. And she's going to be talking about a story of deep sea exploration, mapping geographic data from the 2015-16 capstone expedition using ArcGIS and ArcGIS Online.
Thank you for that introduction. This summer, I created a web mapping application using data from the capstone expedition from 2015 and 2016. This is an outline of my presentation. I'm going to talk briefly about why ocean exploration is important and what the capstone project is and what it stands for. And then I'm going to go through workflow of how I created my final web maps and web mapping applications. And then I'm going to go through what data I actually use to make my maps. And then I'll also show you my final product of my web mapping application called the Story Map, which is using ArcGIS Online. and also the implications of using web mapping applications for the future and for other uses. And then I'll end with my acknowledgements. So to begin, only about 5% of the ocean has been explored in great detail. We can't protect what we don't know. And so that's why ocean exploration is extremely important, because we need to protect these resources, but we need to explore them in order to better manage and protect resources, especially economically valuable ones. The campaign to address specific monument science, technology, and ocean needs, or capstone for short, is a project that is focused on the Pacific Marine National Monuments. And one of the objectives is to collect baseline information about deep sea habitats, specifically about deep sea corals and sponges, and just identifying the marine habitats in the deep sea, and also looking at the biogeographic patterns in the deep sea within monument areas. The other objectives are to look at the geological history and collect geological samples, and they also look at prime crust zones, which I'll talk about a little bit in my demonstration, and also looking at the geological history of the seafloor and seamounts, which are important substrate and habitat for deep sea corals and sponges. And this is a picture from one of the ROV dives when they found an undescribed species of octopus within Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument this year. This is my workflow. It started with data collection from the Okeanos Explorer, and through collaboration tools I was able to download that data, and then I processed it using ArcGIS, the desktop version, and also using ArcGIS Online. And then I was able to upload that data and put it into web mapping applications and create my story map and other web maps. The data that I mapped includes from the capstone expeditions from last year and this year in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, as well as bathymetry and multi-beam data from the Pacific Remote Island Marine National Monument, and also the 2016 deep water exploration of the Marianas. And that is, I mapped up to the second leg of that cruise too. And in each expedition, it includes remotely operated vehicle track lines, the ship track lines, the coordinates and the locations of where they released the ROV to dive, and the biological and geological coordinates and pictures of the samples that they collected for each of their dives, as well as highlight videos and summaries of the dives themselves. And now I'm going to demonstrate my story map. So this is the home page, the landing page of my story map, and it just gives a bit of intro of what capstone is, why it's important, and then on the side here, there's each of these are links to each of the sections throughout my story map. So the first section I put in my story map was just a general map of the marine national monuments of the Pacific. So the Pacific Remote Island area, Papahanaumokuakea, and the Marianas Trench Marine National Monument. And then I went into detail about each of the monuments itself, just a little background, and what Capstone has done within these areas. And in Papahanaumokuakea, this year they found this undescribed species of octopus that was found at about 4,000 meters deep. In the Pacific Remote Island Marine National Monument, last year they mapped in Johnston Atoll and also did collection dives there. And then right now, but a little bit delayed, they're having the live dives of Wake Atoll this year. And you can also, in the general map of the monuments and in each of these sub-monument sections, you can click on a monument to learn more information. And there's also Zoom features as well. The Marianas, this is the Marianas Trench Marine National Monument. Holds the second deepest point on Earth. And they found a lot of things this year for the dives. And if you scroll down, you can click for a video that will launch into the main screen. And it's a video of hydrothermal vents discovery. And then there's also a video within the panel you can play that has a video of a documented but never seen fish until they found it in the Marianas. And it was actually identified here at the IRC by Bruce Mundy. My next section just gives background information about the ship that they used for these capstone expeditions, which is the Okeanos Explorer. It is the only U.S. government ship dedicated to ocean exploration. And this map is basically a slideshow, but you can also interact with it. And it will go through the different types of equipment and where they used it for each of their expeditions. And also just for the remotely operated vehicles. The next section goes into the Okeanos Explorer telepresence. And there are exploration command centers where onshore scientists can interact and participate in the live dives as they're happening so that they don't have to be on the ship or participate in the dives at their convenience. And it really brings together both the public and scientists to participate and get excited about ocean exploration. So one of the main objectives of Capstone is to look at deep sea corals and sponges. Deep sea corals are important because they live hundreds to thousands of years, and they can live at depths from 150 to 10,000 feet deep with no light. And they are vulnerable to extraction for biomedicinal purposes or jewelry. And they're very slow growing, and the Capstone expedition wants to document all of these. And in this panel, you can click on pictures to have a better view of it just by clicking on it. And also last year in Papahanaumokuakea, they found 6 unknown habitat communities featuring high-density deep sea coral communities that they have never seen before. Seamounts are also another objective of the Capstone expedition. Seamounts are underwater extinct volcanoes that are 1,000 meters tall, but do not reach from the seafloor, but do not reach or break the water surface. And this happens to be the most preferable substrate for deep sea corals and sponges. And this is a picture of several species of coral that are living on a seamount. Capstone is also looking at the prime iron manganese crust zones, and iron and manganese precipitate out of the seawater, and then they create nodules, and those nodules can be harvested by humans and turned into, are used for electronics that we use every day, like batteries or cell phone parts. And so it's important to document them, especially in the Pacific, because the Pacific Monument area has the highest concentration of these crusts. And in order to protect them and also manage them, we need to know where they are and their concentrations. And now for my maps. This is a bathymetry map of the Okeanos Explorer. Collects multi-beam data, and this is previous and current capstone data of the Central and Western Pacific, and you bathymetry, and you can click on certain areas and get depths in meters. And there's also a elevation profile tool, which you can see another time because I'm running out of time. And here's the last map is just the compilation of all the samples and dives and ship track lines that Capstone has collected with this year and last year. And you can, there's a legend up here, and there's other little widgets you can use and click on and interact with the map. And there's also future expeditions. Next year they hope to go through the Pacific Remote Island Marine National Monument again, and also American Samoa. Quick implications. These story maps can be used as great outreach tools. They're interactive and they're easily accessible to the public, and they can be updated easily using ArcGIS online. Yes. So use story maps because they're very nice to use, and people really have strong feedback for them and really like how they work. And there's different templates to use for story maps as well. And I'd like to thank Brian Dieter for being such a great mentor, as well as Risa Oram and the Science Operation Division and the Pacific Island Fisheries Science Center for hosting me in my internship. Thank you.
Really nice talk, enjoyed it. Can you give us a concept of how long it takes to, say, create a page in a storybook? You've got about a 10-page book.
Yeah.
How many man-hours does that actually need to get done?
To create it or to read it?
To create it.
Okay.
Yeah.
To create it, getting it all together and finalized, I mean, it took me, you could get most of it done within a week. But I'd like to finalize and get all of the data in there so that you can see it and interact with it. It took probably like 9 weeks.
Can you hear? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just had a question. So did you write all the content that's in the panels on that
No,
website?
I did not. That's like just a compilation of just all from the NOAA Okeanos Explorer website, and also it's from the NOAA Office of Research and Exploration.
And is that available? Is that like out for, can people look at that map, that stuff?
Not yet. Hopefully by next week.
Cool.
All right, thank you, Jasmine, and thanks everybody for coming to check out her talk. When Jasmine first showed up at the IRC at the beginning of the summer, I knew she had taken a couple GIS classes in her undergrad work, but I knew she needed a little bit more exposure, and so the first thing I did was set her up with probably like 10 online training courses that I figured would kind of get her out of my hair for about a week. And she was back at my desk 2 days later. She must have stayed up all night for 2 days just taking all this training, and said she was ready to start making her maps. And so I handed her a hard drive with the first leg's worth of data. And again, I figured she'd be out of my hair for a week. And she was back at my desk about 2 hours later. So that's kind of how the summer went, where she would, every time I handed her something, she was just so productive and worked really hard and was just nonstop devoted to the project. And so because of that, she actually, unfortunately, she didn't get to show you too much of the bathymetry maps that she had put together, but she helped me a lot with coming up with kind of a new framework and a new way of sharing the bathymetry data that I think is going to keep me busy for the next year with some other projects. So, and I know in addition to the work she did for this, she also did some work on behalf of UH Hilo, coordinating some upcoming work with the Office of Coast Survey, as well as she's going to be going out on the Kona IEA cruise next month, and so we're going to get to see more of her. And I look forward to it, and I think everyone's just going to be a great person to work with. So thanks for everything, Jasmine.
Okay, next up we have Cameron Ogden Fung from Bowdoin College. She is a Hollings Scholar, and she's going to be talking about the abundance and distribution of benthic
organisms and mesophotic coral ecosystems across the Hawaiian archipelago.
I'm Cameron Ogden Fung, and I attend Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine, where I'm majoring in environmental studies and earth and oceanographic science. This summer, I worked in NOAA's Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument under the mentorship of Daniel Wagner. My project focuses on studying the abundance and distribution of benthic organisms in mesophotic coral ecosystems across the Hawaiian archipelago. Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument encompasses a vast area of the Pacific. Located within the most remote island chain in the world, the Hawaiian archipelago, it is the largest contiguous, fully protected conservation area under the U.S. The monument covers approximately 140,000 square miles and includes a rich, varied, and unique natural, cultural, and historic legacy. The whole area is considered to be subtropical and at the northern limit of coral growth. The monument supports a diverse array of both marine and terrestrial flora and fauna. Habitats contained within the monument include deep pelagic basins and abyssal plains to coral reefs and coastal grasslands. The physical isolation of the Hawaiian archipelago explains the relatively low species diversity and high endemism levels of biota. The Northwestern Hawaiian Island Reef and Assessment Monitoring Program started in 2000 to establish baselines and monitor temporal changes of the coral reef flora and fauna. Since 2000, annual research cruises have been launched to classify, count, and measure fish, algae, corals, and other invertebrates in the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands, thereby making it one of the most comprehensive monitoring efforts of shallow water marine habitats on this planet. Additionally, there have been several deep water surveys in the monument, starting with the 1902 Albatross expedition that was led by scientists at the Smithsonian Institution, where they collected samples in deep water through the use of deep sea trawls and dredges. In more recent years, there has also been expeditions surveying very deep marine habitats with the use of manned submersibles and remotely operated vehicles, known as ROVs. With the establishment of the monument in 2006, there has been an increased emphasis on characterizing the biodiversity of the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands. The fauna of this region has previously been surveyed both in shallow water through the use of conventional scuba diving, as well as in deeper water through the use of trawls, ROVs, and manned submersibles. However, as in many regions around the world, little is known about the biodiversity found between these two depth ranges. This intermediate depth hosts mesophotic coral ecosystems, which are light-dependent coral reefs that are found below the depth limits of conventional scuba diving and go as far down as the deepest portion of the photic zone, which can be over 150 meters in locations with high water clarity, such as Hawaii. Since 2009, several research expeditions have been launched to survey deeper coral reefs using technical mixed gas diving technologies. My project is part of this effort to add insight into this vastly undersurveyed ecosystem. For my project, I analyzed data from mesophotic coral ecosystems that were surveyed across the entire Hawaiian archipelago during 2 2015 research expeditions aboard the NOAA ship Hi'i'alakai. Data has been analyzed for 7 sites with a total of 28 dive surveys off of islands, atolls, and seamounts from a latitudinal range of 19.65 degrees north to 28.49 degrees north. So these videos were taken from the 2016 expedition on the NOAA ship Hi'i'alakai, which I was fortunate enough to be a part of. The methodology from this research cruise matches the methods from the 2015 research expeditions for the Northwestern and Maine Hawaiian Islands. Smaller boats were used to travel to each site, and once at the site, the technical divers would gear up. All dive surveys were performed using closed-circuit rebreathers, which allow for descent to much greater depths than can be safely reached with conventional scuba equipment. Closed-circuit rebreathers generally consist of at least 2 independent gas supplies. One contains pure oxygen, and the other gas supply is called a diluent. Once the divers reach the bottom, which is about 30 to 90 meters, one diver takes photographs of the benthos at 25 randomly selected points along the transect using a 0.5 meters squared photo quadrat. Here are some of the interesting species that we saw during decompression stops. A lot of Galapagos sharks. Once the divers resurface, all of their gear is brought back onto the boats, and their dive time is approximately 2 hours with only 15 minutes of bottom time. The rest of that time is decompression stops. Here are some of the samples collected from those dives that are later analyzed. Benthic cover was determined from photo quadrat images with the aid of coral point count with Excel extension software using 100 random points per image. All macrobenthic organisms were identified to the lowest possible taxonomic level from photo quadrat images. And then here's just a nice sunset after a day of fieldwork on NOAA's ship, Alakai. So for our results, so we grouped the benthic coverage into 7 main categories: sand, crustoscoralin algae, also known as CCA, turf algae, macroalgae, sponge, coral, and other invertebrates. We found that the abundance and distribution of benthic organisms in mesophotic coral ecosystems varied at each site, making it difficult to see any obvious trends. So we directly compared the sites in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands and main Hawaiian Islands. And we found that in the main Hawaiian Islands, sand and CCA were generally the most abundant macrobenthic group and covered around 45% and 39% respectively. While in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, sand and CCA were also relatively abundant, but so was the presence of macroalgae, covering around 27% of the substrate. And then when specifically looking at seamounts surveyed in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, we found that these sites had the highest macroalgal cover with approximately 41% coverage. And seamounts have been pretty understudied due to the difficulty to access them, but it can be assumed that the structure of these seamounts are creating obstacles that shape ocean currents and are directing deeper and more nutrient-rich waters up the sides of these seamounts. These factors most likely combine to make seamounts areas with high macroalgal coverage and rich habitat for diverse communities of marine life. In conclusion, we found that sand and CCA cover in the main Hawaiian Islands was higher than in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. Macroalgal cover in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands was substantially higher than in the main Hawaiian Islands, and additionally, seamounts in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands had higher macroalgal cover than islands and atolls. Previous studies have also found that the northwestern Hawaiian Islands contain high percent cover of algal species and low percent cover of living corals. This is likely due to the subtropical location of the northwestern Hawaiian Islands and the cool sea surface temperatures that occur during the winter months. The differences in temperature regime have been related to differences in macrobenthic cover within the Hawaiian archipelago. There have also been other studies showing low densities of herbivorous fish at mesophotic coral ecosystems in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, and so those possibly could be related to the high macroalgal coverage. But what is particularly interesting about these findings is that the northwestern Hawaiian Islands are some of the world's most remote and unpopulated islands that are known for being very pristine in comparison to reefs that have constant human populations. And yet these reefs are showing increased macroalgae coverage. So these results are challenging this notion that reefs with high macroalgal coverage are inherently unhealthy. Because despite all the high algal coverage, the northwestern Hawaiian Islands remain a very healthy marine ecosystem with high apex predators and large fish populations. So I plan on continuing my research from this summer as an honors thesis at Bowdoin College. I'll be completing benthic quantification of mesophotic coral ecosystems using CPCE for all the 2015 and 2016 NOAA dive surveys. Then I'll be performing statistical analyses and determining latitudinal trends in the distribution of benthic organisms along the Hawaiian archipelago. I would like to thank the NOAA Ernest F. Hollings Undergraduate Scholarship Program for giving me the opportunity to conduct this research. as well as a big thank you to my mentor, Daniel Wagner, for all of his help and support throughout this project. And lastly, members of the NOAA Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument Office, as well as scientists and crew on the NOAA ship Hi'i'alakai. Thank you.
Curious what corals were included in your surveys. What did you see down there?
Mostly hard corals.
What species of coral?
There was a lot of Porites and in general, there wasn't that much coral compared to sand, CCA, and macroalgae. But yeah, mostly under like Porites and Ontastria. Yeah, sorry, I can't remember the.
So maybe this is a little easier. I don't even know what macroalgae are. I mean, I know what algae are, but I mean, what are these?
So
is this like seaweed, or is it crusting stuff, or what?
So the CCA, that's a particular, it's a red algae that is like a building cement type of algae. So that's, you'll see that in like red colors usually. And then the macroalgae is more of a fleshy type of algae that, yeah, you might, it's easier to recognize.
Seaweed.
Yeah.
Great presentation, by the way. Was there, you were comparing differences between islands, was there any of the islands that you had enough sample numbers to look at differences within an island? And just to see how much variability there was within islands as opposed to this independent community?
Yes, so each island we had replicates of at least 2. And then for the main Hawaiian Islands, like specifically the Big Island, there was 6 replicates for that island, and so you could look at the differences, and there were some big changes in terms of macrobenthic coverage for a particular island, depending on where exactly the sampling was occurring. But usually, like the samples from the seamounts, you would see a lot of macroalgae coverage there compared to those other atolls and islands that were surveyed.
I guess I'm Daniel Wagner for the, I'm Randy Kosaki, and so Cami did in fact, she mentioned, come to us from Bowdoin College in Maine. So of course the first thing we did was throw her on a ship and drag her all the way out to Kure Atoll, which is about as far as you can get from Maine and still be in the United States. She proved to be a real glutton for punishment. We tried throwing her in the water with 30 sharks, it didn't faze her. We worked her till late at night processing specimens, it didn't faze her, she just wanted more. Gave her all those CPC data to analyze. If that wasn't enough, she says she wants more, so she's taking more of her unanalyzed data back to Maine to work up, as she says, for an honors thesis. I'm expecting that if this history repeats itself, she's going to want to do more. So we're setting her up to turn this into not 1 but 2 peer-reviewed papers. The first one will be an expanded version of what she presented today, which is just a descriptive characterization of benthic communities at depth. The second paper, I'm going to throw some of my fish data into the mix, and we'll use kind of a multivariate approach to look at the relationship between benthic habitat cover and fish assemblage structure. So Cami did a perfect job. She's a real workhorse, a pleasure to be with in the field. So thank you for all your help. And thank you in advance for all the help that you're going to provide us over the next year. And wish you well, and enjoy your trip to beautiful downtown Silver Spring.
Thank you. Okay, next up is Austin Hunter from Eckerd College. He's also a Hauling Scholar, and he's going to be talking about corals of opportunity as a restoration tool for Hawaii's coral reefs.
All right, hi, my name is Austin Hunter. I attend Eckerd College in St. Petersburg, Florida. I study marine science, and this summer I was working under Paula Marine and Anna Rosinski out at the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology at Coconut Island. So during this presentation, we'll talk a little bit about the restoration background in general, as well as Hawaii's reef restoration background and how that kind of applies with the management perspectives I've been working on this summer. We'll be talking about what we plan to get done with this project, what I happened to do this summer, the results of what we have so far, and the summary, and some of my future steps. Kind of how coral reef restoration and management work together, some of the different things that are utilized as far as management goes. First of all, we have establishment of marine protected areas to keep our resources well protected, obviously. We have no-take zones and catch limitations, so that way you can't fish in certain areas, and especially in these marine protected areas. Human in-water activity regulation, and that involves things like fishing, boating, swimming, etc., just to make sure that we're not damaging our resources. We also work to minimize land-based sources of pollution. This can be a little bit more tricky, especially with runoff scenarios. And another thing that we're working on is eradication of alien invasive species. Things like macroalgae, and in this case, in Kaneohe Bay, where we're working on our reef nurseries, we have Capophycus blooms everywhere, and one of the main eradication tools is a super sucker barge, which is literally a boat with a big hose that sucks off all the algae. They supplement that with outplanting of urchins. And then the one I worked on personally is the establishment of nurseries. So Hawaii's coral reef restoration, currently nursery restoration practices are very small and super limited. This is very different from Caribbean strategies where they have nurseries all over the place, the line nurseries, the trees that you see in many publications. And so in Hawaii, these are very minimal, and it's something that could be very useful. The nursery that I worked on was an in situ coral nursery, which means it's on site in the field. And this is a response to boat groundings in our case. It was also supposed to take coral fragments from the super sucker operation because the super sucker picks up lots of fragments while it's picking up algae, but the super sucker is down currently because of lack of algae, which is a good thing. But it should be back up as algae comes back, so fragments will be used from there as well. As well as multiple nursery options are going on right now at the same time. So I'm working on the in situ coral nursery, as well as there's what's called an ex situ coral nursery, which is they're growing coral fragments in tanks using microfragmentation. So the ex situ coral nursery is more for restoration in general, where we're working on things with the invasive algae removal and the boat scars. Working on recreational, they're just for restoration of coral reefs as a general rule. It's also used as a great coral repository. So rarer corals that are not found everywhere, endemic species to Hawaii, can be saved in this repository, and then for severe occurrences of damage can be, we have like a safe zone for them, a vault, if you will. Other options are larger scale nurseries, so picking up larger corals. The ex situ nursery uses microfragmentation, so centimeter by centimeter, little tiny fragments. The in situ, we'll talk about the sizes, they're about 3 to 30 centimeters, as well as microfragmentation, we're looking at things like that as well. And then for these larger scale organizations, operations, we're looking at how we can move these larger corals to where we need them to go. So our project objectives are to establish a small scale pilot nursery. As I was saying, there aren't many nursery applications in Hawaii right now. So the small scale nursery will give us a kind of a rundown of how we think it should work. We'll determine the effectiveness of using corals of opportunity for coral reef restoration. Corals of opportunity are small fragments detached from the parent coral. Those, as I was saying, in our case, we're going to be using between 3 and 30 centimeters. We will define parameters for coral success and cost effectiveness within the nursery. Obviously, all of this can be very useful and important, but it also needs to be cost effective. We don't want to be spending tons and tons of money on these things if something doesn't work out. And we hope to provide a guide for future reef restoration practices involving in situ coral nurseries, especially in Hawaii since they are so limited here. As I keep mentioning, we have corals of opportunity as our main source, so we'll be picking those up from recent boat scars that are occurring within Kaneohe Bay. And the size of fragments has a very large limitation there, so that's anywhere from about 1 inch to a foot. But we're trying to keep our scale under about 10 centimeters for our coral fragments. The corals will be transplanted back to our nursery sites around the Coconut Island, which actually happens to be Gilligan's Island as well, fun fact. And for about 1 to 2 years before being transplanted back to the damaged reef sites. So what I actually did this summer, before I could get into the field, there was a lot of management opportunities that I got to join up in and take part in. I learned a lot about how everything works before I got into the field. One of the coolest things I did was I attended the International Coral Reef Symposium, where I learned quite a bit about restoration background and management and heard from hundreds of scientists from all over the world. I joined Morgan with the Mackay Watch program a little bit on the weekends, and we went up to Pupukea and did some surveying. I learned a lot about the logistics of permits, and let me tell you, they are the worst. And I did, of course, lots and lots of literature review. As I was going along, obviously I've been talking about the ex situ coral nursery, so I got to witness how these different scenarios are being set up, how the different nurseries are being run, and I'm kind of at the beginning of all of these processes, and how they're taking place concurrently is very nice. And I got to meet with local management officials and talk about projects that are going on right now and future projects could be helpful. Finally, I got to get into the field work. So out at Coconut Island, we found we needed nursery sites. So we picked 6 sites around Coconut Island, right on this map here. We took 3 reef flat and 3 lagoon sites. The reef flat are the more outer ones right about here, and the lagoon areas are right in here. And so we scouted those out, found some nice places that had coral growth and that we thought would be well protected for our nurseries. As you can see, this is the tables that we were building. They're small 4x4 tables, so this is me. You can see about how tall I am. That's the size of the table. And then here, for scale in the water, I got to kind of model it. So with these tables, what we did, we built 4x4 PVC tables, filled the legs with sand, drilled holes in the frame so that they would be weighted down, and then attached them to cinder blocks. The netting on top is just a mesh netting, so that way we could attach our fragments for easy removal later. More of the work at Coconut Island was I had to help with the design of the fragment plugs. So we made little discs, and we went through quite a bit of trial and error with this, including the cement mixture. So what we found was we had to find a mix of cement, plaster, and sand. We actually kind of borrowed our mixture from the ex situ coral nursery people. They already had a mix that worked pretty well for our uses, but we kind of modified it and tested out some different options for that. And then we also had to work with different molds. We found these nice gardening water holder cups for plants that were perfect size. They're about yay so big around. And we filled those with our cement, drilled holes in them, put zip ties in them, so that way we could attach them easily to our mesh. Once we got our corals, we ended up epoxying them to the coral discs and zip tying them directly to the mesh, so that way when we need to move the coral fragments later after they need to be transplanted back out of the nursery, we can just take them straight off and just cut them from the mesh with no problems and without having to harass the corals too much. The corals that we use 2 species. They're endemic to Hawaii. We use Montipora capitata and Paraides compressa. These 2 species are very, very abundant in Hawaii, and as such they worked out really well for us to use. We use 3 treatments within our 6 nurseries and as well as control sites. So one site was at the reef in question that we were taking corals from due to boat scarring. And those corals are left in place. We tagged them with little red tags, zip tied them there, and left them in place. We actually made a bet where how many we would find, and later I actually lost said bet, so I got to clean up all of the equipment for the day. Another treatment that we used was epoxying corals back down to the damaged reef site to see if our intervention actually has any effect at all, or if it's worth it, if we can just put them right back where they go, or if the nursery is actually useful. And then obviously we have our nursery sites back around Coconut Island. And those 6 sites, we kind of spread the corals out among them. We finally got to go into the water and do some coral collection, and I got to sign a permit for that. That was one of the more fun things I got to do this summer. I actually have my name on a little legal piece of paper. It's kind of fun. And I got to be a coral collector. So we got to go out and utilize this very recent boat scar, probably 3 or 4 days old. It's about 20 meters long, and it's a very small patch reef in general, so it's kind of astonishing that it can even be that large of a boat scar on such a small, flat area. It seemed like the people hit the reef, did not decide to try to get out of it, but instead go straight on through. So this was our playground for collecting our coral fragments for the nursery. Gave us quite a few fragments to pick from. We made transects along these boat scars, and as you can kind of see, let's see the nice picture. Down in this zone right here, you can kind of see some of the scarring, and these are some of the scars from the boat and how the boat just tore right through the reef. So along this transects, we picked out a couple of markers, about at a meter mark apparently, and we picked corals from these spots. We picked 5 from each photo quadrat that we picked to take back to our nurseries, and we picked 5 to tag and leave in place at each site. We took photo quadrats in order to figure out where our corals were, make exact measurements, and so that way we knew exactly what we had to work with. Then we got to transport the corals back to our nursery site, which was a lot of bagging and tagging and labeling and a lot of swimming time, so that was really nice. I got to be in the water for that. We zip tied the corals directly to our mesh table to kind of acclimate them to our nursery setting for a few days before we took them out and moved them to the other 5 sites. And then after a couple of days, we mounted the corals with epoxy to the fragment plugs. Research is currently ongoing, which is a nice way of saying I don't actually have any results currently, except for the corals that we found when we went back out on the day that I lost that bet. We're right now monitoring for mortality of the corals that are floating around loose on the reefs, as well as the corals that are hanging out on our coral table. We'll be using the software programs to use photos of the corals that we've taken to measure the growth over time. And as I mentioned, we did find most of the tagged corals. I bet we would find 4 out of the 10. We found 8. So why is this important? Obviously, we all know that coral reefs provide homes for many countless species of animals, plants, inverts, etc. And they also create buffer zones for totally lost it. They create buffer zones for erosion for us as well. It's very important to start up these practices because Hawaii is very behind in coral reef nursery restoration techniques. As I was mentioning, the Caribbean has been at this for years and years, and they have lots to model for us, but in our case, the growth is much slower out here in Hawaii, so we're just now really getting to the testing phases of all of this, and if it works, it's a great tool to add to the restoration toolkit that we have already. And it's also important because since we don't have a ton of restoration techniques actively happening right now, and we are just continually running boats through our patch reefs and all of the reefs, that we need to find a way to make this all better and fix up our damages. So what did I gain from this? Quite a lot of valuable management experience. I got to meet with quite a few people, as I mentioned, some big names, and learn a lot about how everything works in the field. I got a really nice sunburn once or twice. I was very pink colored, and I'm currently working on my tan. When the lights come on, you can see how I'm progressing. I learned that permits are a terrible thing and take a long time, but apparently very necessary, and so we always have to plan ahead for all of that work. I got a lot of nice hands-on field work. I got to do a lot with building things, which was fun, as well as being in the water, collecting corals, and doing some monitoring work. As well as countless networking opportunities, as I was mentioning. I also made some friends with the fish. This is a baby pilot fish that we met on our monitoring, and a little tiny squid. So with the future steps of the project, we have to continue monitoring the corals at the nursery and on site at Reef 20, which is our collection site. We'll be transplanting the corals back after set amounts of time in the nursery, monitoring recovery conditions at Reef 20. If the nursery seems to be successful and we're growing corals faster and keeping them alive just fine, we'll need to scale it up. And working with other kinds of nurseries like the ex situ and the larger scale commercial type coral nurseries. This coming year I'll also be doing a comparison study of the different nursery types for my senior thesis at Eckerd. As far as acknowledgements go, thank you to Paula Marine and Anna Rosinski for learning with me, and I got to learn with her on all of this fun stuff. Zach Forsman out at HIMB and everybody with DAR that I worked with and at the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Austin. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little more about the technique that's used to sever or, attain the piece of coral that you're then using as a transplant, because I would assume you can't just lop it off and have it, survive. So yeah, you can talk about that.
Yeah, sure. The corals we're using, as I was mentioning, are corals of opportunity, which are fragments that are already broken off. We didn't break any of them off ourselves. They're already there from these boat scars that crash through the reefs, and things that when we're doing invasive algae cleanups with a super sucker barge are getting collected anyway. They're already in hand. You don't know what to do with them, so we would plant them in the nursery. They're not something we've broken off ourselves, but something that is already damaged, so that we're trying to save these corals rather than make our own fragments.
And so they usually survive?
That's what we're testing.
Got it.
Can you explain a little bit about the process of epoxying something underwater?
We found, it's called a splash zone epoxy. You can get it at your local West Marine. You go and get this 2-part epoxy. It mixes together underwater, and it's the only one that I know of that mixes underwater and completely cures underwater. So everything that we do, we just kind of squished it all together, stuck it on the fragment plug, and then put the coral on it, and it hardens up. Really handy.
And I know you've only been here for 9 weeks, but have you observed any actual growth in the nurseries, whether it's, you know, a millimeter, 5, or...
Unfortunately, we got kind of a slower start at the actual nursery part. We just got the corals out there about 2 weeks ago at most. Yeah, collection's been very recent, so yeah, we don't have much results on that. The only thing we really have is finding the loose ones.
Hi, I'm Anna Rosinski. I just wanted to say mahalo so much for Austin and working on this project. This is part of my PhD dissertation work at the University of Hawaii, and Austin's first day was also my first day embarking on this adventure. And he had so much knowledge to provide, especially when it comes to coral husbandry and his experience with aquaria. And we really did learn from the very beginning how this was all going together. So I appreciate his patience and his enthusiasm and his excitement for this project. And thank you, Paulo, for also setting up this internship.
Sure. Austin, let me here come on stage to congratulate you personally on your choice of shirt and your choice of mentor. So Austin has done such a great job that we are actually rehiring him. Very pleased to hear that he is going to be back here with us for the senior thesis, answering the question, is it working or not? And then also getting an answer, handle on management implications, not just the science. I keep telling him, look at the management side. How can this help some of the tremendous coral need that we have here in the States? So I'm very happy to have you here. You've taken every challenge. You know, you were the first one in the water, the last one wanting to get out. Tremendous enthusiasm for what needed to be done. So very proud to have you here. Well done.
And I'll say our final speaker of today, not our last one, is Shayna Gallagher from Tufts University. She's also a Hauling Scholar, and she'll be talking about Coral Reef Support Group, how the world will monitor the ecological impacts of ocean acidification on reef ecosystems.
Hi everyone, is this the clicker? Yes. Thank you so much for staying for the grand finale. I'll be signing programs at the end. And again, my name is Shayna Gallagher. I come here from Tufts University, which is in Boston, and I am also working in the Coral Reef Ecosystem Program with Drs. Rusty Brainerd and Tom Oliver. Yes, so I, this summer, have been working to develop the Standard Operating Procedures, or SOPs, that the Coral Reef Ecosystem Program uses to document the methodology that we use then to monitor the ecological impacts of ocean acidification on coral reef ecosystems. And we're doing this because we hope to be able to share our methods using these SOPs with the rest of the world, and specifically at an upcoming meeting of the IOC Westpac, which I will explain in a moment, that's happening in Thailand at the end of August, that Rusty and another member of the CREP team will be attending. And so I will, sorry, I'm forgetting how this works. I will explain quickly some background about the objectives of this project, and I'll do so by elaborating about the Coral Reef Ecosystem Program and its INCRIMP program, or the National Coral Reef Monitoring Program, and its methods. I'll then again explain the structure of IOC Westpac, which is the UN body that has been designated to address coral reef ecosystem conservation and management issues in the Western Pacific, and then talk about the future directions and implications of this project. And I'd just like to start by taking this opportunity to ground my own project and all of our projects in the context of climate change, because we use this term a lot. I think it's easy to become very desensitized to it and sort of forget what I see as our very urgent responsibility as scientists to take action and raise awareness based on our knowledge of climate change. And so this is something I've been very passionate about for my entire life. I've pursued this nexus of science and communication and policy for most of my career so far, and that's what led me to this project and why I'm so honored to be a part of the really important work that Tom and Rusty are doing with the Coral Reef Ecosystem Program. And so again, logistically, my project was to develop the standard operating procedures that we use here at the Coral Reef Ecosystem Program to monitor the ecological impacts of ocean acidification on coral reefs. And this is building on work that has been started in the Western Pacific under IOC Westpac to help other countries use similar monitoring methods that we have developed here at NOAA. And we really do have sort of an unparalleled monitoring methodology that is going to be very important in terms of streamlining monitoring methods for, again, the entire world going forward. And so some background about this. The Coral Reef Ecosystem Program has this National Coral Reef Monitoring Program, or INCRIM, which has the following goals, and it surveys the map that you can see here. These are the the Hawaiian Islands and other Pacific Island regions that are under U.S. control. And so again, we use methods described by procedures or SOPs to conduct this monitoring. And so the INCRIM program and plan was established in 2010 based on the understanding that coral reef ecosystems are extremely valuable but also very vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and other natural threats. And so of its many goals, the ones that are the most relevant for my project are providing periodic assessments of coral reef ecosystem statuses and trends, which is done by the Pacific RAMP, which I'll explain in greater detail in a moment, and developing consistent and comparable methods for indicators or our standard operating procedures. And so the methods described by these SOPs fall under 4 main monitoring themes, which are benthic community structure, fish community structure, climate impacts, and socioeconomic conditions. And these ramp cruises, which we've already heard a little bit about today, are accomplished by deploying instrumentation that monitors reef biodiversity, carbonate accretion and erosion balance, and seawater carbonic chemistry. And so they're extended research cruises, which happen on a 3-year cycle. The schedule since the year 2000 can be seen on the right there. And so I will quickly go through the methods that are used on these ramp cruises, which consist of instrumentation that monitor water temperature, pH, and other physical aspects of the coral reef ecosystem environment, collecting coral cores, which allow us to understand coral growth and extension rates, calcification accretion units, and bioerosion monitoring units, which used together essentially help us to understand whether a reef is net growing or shrinking, which obviously has huge implications for the entire coral reef ecosystem. And most notoriously are ARMS, or autonomous reef monitoring structures, which are the most kind of widely acclaimed and known aspect of our monitoring methods. And these allow us to monitor coral reef biodiversity and community structure. And so all of these methods are included in the INCRIM climate stations, which you can see a little diagram of here. And so I'll just, hold on. I will play a quick video showing the deployment of this station. I should mention I did not choose the music for this video. And so as you can see, some of these processes are pretty intricate and definitely need to be, there needs to be a very specific procedure that's followed in order to make sure that with the frequency of the cruises and collecting data, everything is happening in a consistent manner. And so it's very important for the development of these SOPs, especially for potential non-native English speakers, that we have as many details and an easily digestible format for all of our methods. Quickly, I just wanted to make another side note about the ARMS, which, as you can see by this map, have really taken off and have already been deployed in over 1,000 locations globally. And so the SOP that we're developing for the assembly, deployment, recovery, and processing of ARMS will be a very important component of this upcoming workshop in Thailand, and Rusty and another member again of our office, Molly, will be going to present about this methodology and make sure that it can be replicated by our partner countries in the IOC Westpac. And so coming back to Pacific RAMP, these are the stations where variations of the INCRIM climate sites are installed. And they, again, allow us to monitor the ecological impacts of ocean acidification, on coral reef ecosystems. And so here are some of the said impacts and stresses to these ecosystems. And so what I'd like us all to consider at this time is, what do RAMP and the other INCRIMP methodologies that are, again, described by our various standard operating procedures give us? And the answer is comparable data across environmental, physical, temporal, and ecological gradients. And these provide an improved understanding of ecosystem relationships and large-scale processes, importantly, which have a huge implication for local conditions, but often cannot be managed locally. So it's very important to try and, again, make sure we have consistent data monitoring these things. The value of these observations and methods will obviously increase as time goes on and more people and places are using these methods. And it will help us then be able to develop predictive models and assist with conservation efforts. And so coming back again to Pacific RAMP, these are some of the questions that arise based on the measurements that we are able to gain using the methods described by our standard operating procedures. Are reefs currently accreting or eroding? How will these processes change with changing environments, etc.? And while these are very important and interesting questions for us to consider here in Honolulu from a scientific point of view, for a lot of countries around the world, especially in the Western Pacific and Southeast Asia, these are actually questions of survival. And so the IOC Westpac was established to help these countries better understand, monitor, and manage the impacts of climate change on coral reef ecosystems and on human communities. And so IOC Westpac has 22 member states, of which America is one, and NOAA specifically plays a very important leadership role within this body, helping our partner countries to implement the same methods that we've been using. And so I'll quickly play a video that was produced by IOC Westpac, but that I edited, explaining its role and vision.
Hubungan kita masyarakat ini antara laut sama halnya dengan anak kita atau tubuh kita sama saja.
The ocean translates into economic growth of the world.
We've seen a decline and loss of about half the coral reefs and growth of dead zones.
Ocean is part of our life. It's fundamental for us. If we don't protect that in the long term, we die.
Tubuh kita memang sudah hancur, tetapi kita juga karena kekayaan atau keindahan kesejahteraan kita juga letakkan dalam laut.
The world needs a new philosophy, not a philosophy of competition, but a philosophy of cooperation. We survive or we perish together. No one group can survive alone.
All right, so as we can see from this map, if we combine NOAA's INCRIMP monitoring stations along with the planned IOC Westpac monitoring stations and eventually the remainder of Pacific Island nations, this will be an extremely substantial part of the global oceans that will be monitored by the methods that have been developed by CREP here in the INCRIMP monitoring program and that are then documented and shared based on our SOPs or standard operating procedures. And establishing this baseline is extremely important towards streamlining and strengthening international monitoring efforts going forward so that we can better understand, again, and respond to the impact of climate change on these coral reef ecosystems, yes. And it, again, is a unique and pretty rare opportunity for the U.S. to take leadership on a conservation issue. And so as the IOC Westpac network continues to develop and as climate change worsens, the SOPs used by INCRIMP definitely have the potential to be the foundation for all global monitoring efforts going forward. And that's, again, why I think that I have been so lucky to be a part of this program and this work, and I'm really excited to see how these SOPs are used in the future And I wanted to just end by thanking my mentors for, again, allowing me to contribute to this project, Drs. Rusty Brainerd and Tom Oliver specifically, and the rest of the CREP office. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Shayna. As I think she described, one of the things she didn't mention is she's only been here for about a month now. She started her internship relatively late, and fortunately for us, she comes back. She'll be going to Washington and be coming back immediately after the Hollings program to finish. But she's been incredibly instrumental in pulling together these standard operating procedures. So a lot of these methods we've been doing for a while, and the people who are doing them know exactly how to do them. And they've sometimes written down what they do, but they're doing them from they know what they're doing, so they don't know what's missing. And we're trying to have folks in Malaysia and in Thailand and the Philippines and Indonesia and across the Indian Ocean be able to use these procedures, that some of those obvious steps for somebody who's been doing it again and again and again are missed. By having fresh eyes, who's never done all of these procedures, looking at them all, she's able to ask those questions. Well, what do I do between this step and this step? That's not at all obvious, and that sort of thing. She's also been having to reach out to people in Thailand that we work with, people in Indonesia that we work with, people at Woods Hole that we're working with, collaborators in Miami, folks she's never met. And she's been kind of the link, reaching out for them to review and to provide their protocols, and then trying to put them into a standardized format for us. So it's incredibly challenging, but I think she described very well how important this undertaking is to get standardized observations. So thank you, Shayna. It's been really a tremendous pleasure working with you, and I look forward to you having coming back. She's also done a favor to other members of the CREP team. She house sat for Ivor and Mariska while they were gone, took care of their pets, and I'm going to be going on a vacation soon. She's going to be house sitting and taking care of our pets as well. So
yeah, if anyone else
multiple
has pets.
services. Thank you, Shayna.
Intern /pet sitter.
/pet sitter. I would just like to reiterate what Rusty said, and also just say, even though she's only been here a month so far, she, as Rusty implied, really hit the ground running when she came in. All of that coordination takes a deep amount of interest and sort of an aggressive approach to finding collaborators and really trying to turn, as Rusty described, what is in the heads of our staff into a document that we can share, right? And from the very beginning, Shayna has tackled that with gusto, and that's exactly what's required to make this work. And I also really want to say that I respect her ability to see the long game, even having only been involved in a pretty short while, right? So the details of putting together a scientific standard operating procedure and getting it right and getting it transmissible to a new audience doesn't strike everyone in the world as the most exciting undertaking for a few months. But I think also from the very beginning, Shayna saw what was cool, why this is a critically important project. And how it actually can transform a large swath of the world's oceans and some of the most critically endangered parts of the world's oceans to really put us in a footing to understand these processes at the scale that they occur. And your ability to look past what can be tedious detail into that bigger picture has been a really, really important skill to bring to this. So good luck in Washington, and we look forward to your return.
Thank you.
Before I give up my role as moderator, I did want to acknowledge all the people that were speaking today. Thank you so much for your time and great presentations. And also to acknowledge Don before he comes up, and such a great job he did for organizing, wrangling us all, and getting last minute details done.
Thanks, Amy. I just wanted to thank her for moderating our last session and thanking all the speakers and mentors for keeping us on time. We've done really well on time all day despite our numerous technical challenges. Before I let you all go, I want everybody who's listed on the back page of the program, you know who you are, to raise your hand or stand up or both. I want you to be recognized. That's you, Daryl. Adrian. Everybody. Cross-program, cross-divisional, cross-line office team that pulled this off, tapping both sides of the building. So it's a really cool thing to be part of it, and I hope I can do this again next year. Thank you for coming.